let's introduce like the show. So like
Absolutely.
thanks for coming. Like we've had a few talks before. And I've always thought that I don't know if it goes both ways, but I've always thought that you were like incredibly smart and a really great debater. Um, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
like I just like I don't know, I just find you super interesting, so I want to have a chat. But
Thank you.
oh, sorry about that. That's my phone.
You're good. You're good. Don't worry about it.
Um,
And I appreciate that a lot. Likewise, I really enjoyed. I do recognize I was a little spicy in our first one, but
it's
I hope you'll
okay.
forgive me
Everyone was
for
spicy with me. Okay, it was
it
a
was a
trial by
little.
fire.
That's how they go. That's the debate sphere.
Yeah.
I'm kind of known for being a little spicy sometimes, but I mean, I don't know. Like there's certain things I get a little irked by, but yeah, I have a lot of respect for you. I've seen you on a lot of panels, and I'm glad we're getting to talk. You know,
Yeah, same.
uh, always happy to get to talk with other fem presenting people in Twitch spaces. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
because
for having me on.
it's rare, especially in the political world.
Yep.
And I'm pretty opinionated, and you're very opinionated. And it's just, I don't know, like a lot of women in general are scared to be like that. So for me, it's just cool to have other role models that are doing the same thing. So I also like really appreciate that. I'm sure like all the other women in the chat and femme presenting and stuff like feel the same way.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I hope to see more and more over time. So.
But yeah, so I'll just introduce the show. Every Monday and Wednesday, I sit down with someone I find super interesting, and I do what I call an Eris talk to highlight the story and kind of see how the personal connects with the political. Since you tend to see all these characters in very, I guess, intense situations where we're all yelling at each other, and sometimes it's just nice to get to know like why we have those opinions, like and where they come from, and just to have something a little more chill. I'll introduce myself. I am a grad student in history, and I love learning and engaging with ideas with like honesty and charity. I'm also founder of Discord's biggest brain server, Calliope Club. But today we have Demon Mama, as you guys all know, one of the few prominent women in the online debate world, and happens to be very good at it. So she tends to strike fear in lots of people's hearts. And just to be clear, like I forgot to ask your pronouns. Pronouns are she and her,
Yeah, I
right?
use she, her. Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Um, thus, you have gathered a notorious reputation for that, which I feel like you've
I
kind of
have.
cultivated, you know?
I mean, to a degree, but at the
And
same
the
time, I
name's
think that
Demon.
the name's Demon Mom. Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, I didn't really choose it for that reason, but I did sort of embrace it a little bit, sort of a following the wear it like your armor sort of thing. But I mean,
Yeah, I actually love it,
I
to be
think
honest.
sometimes my reputation outpaces the reality, even with my propensity for spice. But yes.
Well, I think, I don't know. As I mentioned, I just think it's so cool that you completely put yourself out there. You get spicy. You're not afraid to get dirty with the boys. And it's just like, I don't know what other euphemism to yearn for that. And like, that's just something that I love doing too. And I was a little nervous about getting into it with Twitch, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just cool to see another
With
woman
good
doing that shit.
reason. I mean, there's a lot. It's a rough space sometimes, and it's
Yeah.
especially rough because the boys club often doesn't take particularly nicely to people to femme people who speak up, and then they
Hmm.
don't really treat you with the same respect that they would treat other people, unfortunately, which we can talk about if you want to. I've talked about that numerous times on stream,
I'd
so
love
feel
to
free
get
to
into
ask
that
questions.
soon. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's just, I don't know. There's people often think that like sexism and transphobia and stuff, it comes in like, oh, I don't like you because you're a woman or you're trans. In reality, it's often much more subtle than that. At least on like
Mhm.
a day-to-day basis. In terms of like when you're meeting someone and talking to someone and debating with them, they'll often have like these subtle kind of micro ways of making you feel pretty shitty. Um,
Yeah, people laugh sometimes at the term like microaggression, but they fucking add up. They
yeah,
really add
no, they
up.
do.
Yeah, and like when you get a whole bunch of when you when you when you do something that's like half as spicy as everybody else on the panel and get twice the shit for it just because you're the only femme on the panel, like yeah,
Yep.
it starts to feel a little crappy.
I know what that's like. And I feel like you do too.
Yep,
Yeah,
for
I'm sure
sure.
like you've been in debates where, say, you've taken on, say, the same position as someone like Vosh, but people treated like you were the one with the really crazy position, even though it was the exact same.
Yeah, I had an entire like cancellation cycle. I don't use that word lightly, cause you know, I don't know, it gets used to hell. But I had a whole fucking session of people trying to fucking destroy my channel because of that. Which we can, again,
Could
I
you
think
tell
you
me a bit
said you
about
did
that?
want to. I can if you'd like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm new to this
So
world, so I don't know a lot about what happened beforehand.
yeah. So okay. I would say that I've had like probably two, like what I would say reach the level of cancellations where people were like actually calling for me to be deplatformed and all kinds of things like that. The first one was the result of I really didn't expect the first one at all. Well, actually, to be completely honest, I didn't expect either of them, though. I didn't. The first one that ever happened, like I didn't even expect after the debate got a little bit spicy. And it was this whole thing where I was having a debate with somebody and it started pretty good for the first like hour and a half. It was like pretty low key and not spicy at all. And then a few things were exchanged back and forth and it got kind of spicy. But afterwards, the result of that conversation was somebody published a manifesto on me
Oh
that got
no, the dreaded
like
manifestos.
yeah, dreaded manifesto, and it was incredibly dishonest, and it sort of wrapped up by saying that I was like a danger to women and stuff because which is a huge stretch because the argument the debate that we were talking about was like um it was like whether it started about whether like using someone as a friend is the same thing as using someone for sex, and then it kind of like branched from there and got into other topics. And we got into some like weird entitlement stuff, like about specifically talking about how like a lot of it is the experience of a lot of women that they feel like sort of passively pressured all the time, that
Hmm.
any kindness that they show towards any like random guy is going to be picked up as flirting. And that was then, confirmed in the conversation, and I was like, well, you see how this is like playing into that, right? And then it sort of spun into this whole thing where all of a sudden I was a bad feminist because for some reason, because I didn't acknowledge the part that women had, even though I never said anything about that because we were talking about, and it turned into this whole thing. And I ended up just getting, I was really like I was a pretty small channel. I hadn't even crossed 100 average viewers. Now I pull like somewhere between 150 and 250,
Hmm.
depending on the day and stream. But at the time I hadn't even crossed 100, and I was getting like 1,000, like, I got, like, 1,000 comments on one of my videos, and most of them
Holy
were
shit.
severely negative. And
That's
then,
got to
of
do
course,
shit to your mental health too, right?
oh,
When
it
that
was
shit's going on.
terrible, like yeah, I was not even ready for it, and, like, the thing is, like, I consider myself somebody with a pretty thick skin, like, I'm pretty good to deal, but, like, that scale, I've never talked to 1,000 people at the same time, let alone had 1,000 plus people commenting, and, of course, that was only on YouTube. If you consider all the other platforms, I was getting bombarded on Twitter. I couldn't even go on Reddit because, like, Reddit was just if I even looked into the Reddits that I usually follow, there was a lot of people
Hmm.
talking about me. And then that whole incident sort of set up for the second one, which was the one that you asked me about, the whole RGR situation.
Hmm.
And that turned into that was like a totally unplanned random debate between
Yeah,
me
you
and
guys were just like
RGR.
hanging out, and
Yep.
just like chilling, and then yeah, and then
Yeah,
this just it
it
just
sort of
happened into a debate, right? Like accidentally.
yeah. Basically we were literally memeing at first. Like I had not even planned to have her on. We were just kind of like, you know how it happens sometimes in streaming. Somebody pops by like, "Hey, you want to chat?" And we're like, "Yeah, let's do it. Come on." And then we started chit-chatting. We were having a fake debate about Godzilla versus King Kong. Which was like has been a,
Classic.
a meme, yeah, a big meme lately because of the movie and everything. And so and I have a pretty strong pro Kong position. And so we were having fun with that. But then at some point it turned into this whole thing. And after that, like I realized having been through the first whole ringer, I was like, okay, there's a chance that this is going to become like a huge deal. So, my approach to that was like we locked the VOD. We were just like,
Hmm.
nope, it wasn't planned. This wasn't planned content. This is like a this became a really personal fight. We're not gonna fucking play on this. But other people involved did not decide to do that, and it went. like hyper viral. And um and by the end of it, like the VOD, like I mean, I don't even know by the end, but like by the time that I had published my like I did a response video about it,
Hmm.
is all that I did. And that was like 4 days after the debate, and I had been radio silent. I even canceled my streams. I was just like, I'm sitting this one out. But I realized that it was getting to the point where people were just totally like mischaracterizing everything about me. And so I made a response. And by the time I had made a response, over 100,000 people had seen just one of the VODs, of the very long VODs that was made about me, that was claiming all kinds of things that I'd never said. There was this narrative on Twitter. On Twitter, I literally just logged out of Twitter completely because I was getting tagged so frequently with this idea, with people saying that I'm a transphobe, that I'm like a disgusting subhuman piece of shit,
Oh my
like,
god.
just genuinely horrible harassment. Every single platform was totally choked out. And that was by the time that I had put my response up. And then I put my response up and I didn't do anything until the next Monday. And then I just resumed my normal streaming, and didn't really talk about it much. Now I've since then, now that we've gotten some distance with it, I've weighed in about the drama and the cancellation aspect since, but it was super unpleasant. It was like one of the most like lopsided, unfair, like again, small channel at that point. Again, I
Yeah.
hadn't even reached these numbers, and I was a little bigger than I was the first time. But we were talking channels that have 120 times my viewership, or 120 times, and like huge gap, just focusing on me for 8 hours of stream time, 16 hours of stream time, and just saying the worst shit you can imagine about me. And then their fans are like, we gotta take care of this person. It was just like, holy shit.
I
So
just wish people
yeah,
would look when they're doing like React Andy content and just anything like that. I just wish people would remember that there's like someone actually behind that computer. There's like
yeah.
literally, even if someone said something that you think is incorrect or you think is harmful, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is like a terrible person. They deserve to be harassed. The jump that people take with online figures is just crazy to me.
Well, I think there's a couple of like key things that happens. Like I mean, all obviously the internet is like, unfortunately, for the last like 5 years been kind of infamous for widespread harassment. I think like the Gamergate saga kind
Yep.
of made that a thing that hasn't gone away yet. Um and but eh, there's this there's a certain way of that some people respond to videos, and the way things are framed, that I think are arguably irresponsible, like pretty irresponsible. And it does frustrate me, especially because there is this effect where nobody even tries to give charitability to the person who's just not the person that they go to watch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it goes beyond even being political disagreements, because to a certain degree, you can understand, like, okay, if you have significant political disagreements, if somebody's advocating for the total opposite worldview of you can understand people being pretty mad. But a lot
Hmm.
of times it's not that. It's just they're not your favorite streamer, and your favorite streamer said that they're bad. And therefore, we're going to go hog wild on this person. And
Yep.
they stop seeing you as a human. And they just, I mean, I can't even begin to tell you, like, the dregs of the types of comments and DMs. And we had to lock down our Discord. It basically killed 2 weeks of my streaming career because of how horrible. And it doesn't help you at all. You don't gain anything from it. That's the thing. Like, some people are like, oh, you're churning up drama. You gain nothing. If you come across like if you get bombed by like a Keemstar or some equivalent on a different part of the internet,
Hmm.
um, those people don't stick. They don't follow you. They don't sub to you. They don't give you money. They don't do anything. They just
Yeah,
harass
it's
you
not
and
like
then they leave.
real additions to your
Yeah,
viewership.
you don't get anything.
Yeah.
Your video might get some extra views and some extra comments and shit, but that doesn't do anything in the algorithm in the long run. And the toll on the fact that you're unable to use social media just it makes life hell. It really does. And thankfully I've gotten a lot better at like dealing with social media. But the
Yeah,
reality is
practice is
like,
a big thing in this world, right? Like just like
yeah,
learning from your
absolutely.
previous mistakes.
But at the same time, like, I also know that, like, if this had happened to me like 5, 10 years ago, if I had happened to start streaming earlier in my life, I probably wouldn't have handled it nearly as well. And it would have been very easy for it to perpetuate for much longer and just completely wreck my mental health. And I will say that the first one sucked and it was stressful, but I was able to get through it. The second one was so overwhelming. Like more people saw me getting not just lightly trashed on, like completely and utterly insulted and debased by another streamer who is just like fucking piece of trash. Like this person is just terrible and like a danger to everybody. Just the claims were so ridiculous. More people than have like ever seen my work saw that video. And that is like a
That's
type of numbers that your brain can't really get. It's like, oh, like, what do I do? Like, should I just close up shop? And the answer is no, don't close up shop because those people have really short attention spans. But it's pretty stressful, and I will say that I struggled with that for a while, and it took me, getting back into streaming. Like, it took me a couple streams before I was feeling like I was even close to where with the level of comfort I was, just because there was this part of my brain that was constantly thinking about like, oh shit, am I gonna say something off random in the stream and it's gonna result in like another wave of harassment? Is it gonna result in me having to lock
yeah,
down
it
again?
creates this toxic culture of fear. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
yep.
Yep.
That stuff, like, I wonder if, because you've had conflict with other streamers, like I think
Oh.
like Destiny, but there did seem to be like something particularly sad about like this conflict between you and Riley, right?
Yeah. I mean, I
And that
agree.
was like, yeah, that was just way more hurtful.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and the thing is, I mean, of course, like the true trouble, like for me at least the like when it got really bad was when other people got involved because, a falling out with
That's always
somebody
how
is a
it
very
works. It just makes it so
of
much
course.
worse.
Yeah, it always makes it worse, especially when that
Yeah.
person is a big and influential streamer and also hates your guts. But like in that particular case, yeah, it was very I agree, it was really sad, and, like, it was really sad for me personally. I don't think I've ever had a moment where I've been so emotionally compromised by the end of a conversation that I needed to end stream, but I did that night, and if a lot of
Mhm.
people never saw that because a lot of it was not, my side was not seen because I chose to say, like, "Hey, like, I hope that we can have a ceasefire and work our things out in the future." Obviously, that's not what happened. Um, but and because of that, nobody saw my side of it, or anything I said afterwards. But after that, like I literally stopped stream because I fucking broke down. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and
And
the
so it was
debate
something that
wasn't
bothered
on
me.
anything just casual, right? It was on
No.
something really intense, like probably one of the most important issues like of the day, right? So
Yeah.
I understand like that there were, and what seemed to me like when I watched it, it seemed like she was feeling like you were talking down to her, and
Mhm.
you were feeling like, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you were feeling like she was having to justify the existence of being trans. And so
Well, I mean,
there
that was
was
sort of
both
what
like this defensive kind of feeling that just created
there
this
was
toxic
for sure.
atmosphere.
I mean, part of it, that was sort of my feeling at the end was like, and a lot of people latched onto that and really uncharitably interpreted what I said there. I think uncharitably to the degree of just absolutely lying about what I said. Um, but like most of what I was frustrated about on my side about that conversation was I felt like I couldn't leave. And like I actually have
That's
there is
interesting.
it
Yeah, like
was well, and
that's
I can
really interesting
explain
that you
that
say
too.
that.
Yeah, like, if you want me to explain, like, where I was with that,
Yeah. Like
in
take
that
me
place, like,
into your
well,
head in that
sure.
moment, right? Because I feel
Absolutely,
like a
yeah.
lot of people have had those experiences, but privately, like when with their friends, right?
Yeah, and it's like there was a and that's part of the reason. By the way, since then, I have revised my internal rules, of how I do my show, as a result of something I learned from that conversation. Um, and it was, which was that I made a sort of rule for myself that like if people push past me telling them no once, then I will end the show. If I'm not being
Hmm.
respected on my own show, I will just I don't care. Like even if they're my friend. or somebody who I respect a lot, the show, like, I have to have the ability to end something on my terms on my show. And then I also gave my lead mods the ability to, if something like that's happening again and it doesn't seem like I've caught on to it, to kick me out of the voice call. So
Yeah,
so that it can at least cause a break on the show, and
because
because
you're
I'd rather
probably
have a
not in the place like mentally to be able to say to even like tell yourself, no, this is not a good idea to be continuing
yeah,
this.
I wasn't that time. I think in the future I will be, hopefully. But it's like, but in that one I was totally blindsided. And I can explain where this was. So like when it first started, it was very fun, and I invited a friend, somebody who I had, our Discord was partnered with her Discord, which is like there's this whole thing we've been doing with Discord partnerships where, and we're actually working on finally getting another two more set up. Basically they're sort of informal partnerships where you have a channel devoted on each server to your partner servers. Generally, you look for, the goal is to find servers that are similar to yours.
Mm-hmm.
And you generate a special link and a blurb so that people who are like bored on a day I'm not streaming or whatever can go to the Discord partnership channel and find another channel that they will have a good time in. And we were partners with RGR, and we even had like we had assigned emissaries from, like, we called it that for fun, but it's like we had assigned mods who were guest mods from the other communities so we could get to know
So
each
you
other. It
got
actually was
like you were
super
allies,
pog.
and that's probably
Yeah, it
why
was
this
like,
was particularly harmful.
yeah, and it was like we had this whole thing, and so there was a lot of stuff there. I mean, I covered for her stream once where she raided into me, and I off the blue on a day I wasn't streaming, and I was like, all right, let me get on, I'll raid, I'll take care of your viewers, and I'll send them back to you afterwards so they stay entertained while you go do something. So we had a lot of history and whatnot. Like, I wouldn't say we were like IRL friends, but we were definitely professional like friends. And so we started getting into this, and the debate kind of came out of nowhere. And in the debate, I actually went back and I've watched it, of course, many times since then. I was actually,
I
originally I
admire
said it
that
was
you've
three
done
times.
that, right? Like I think
What's
that
that?
that's I admire that you've actually rewatched it, right? Because I'm sure that's
Yeah.
challenging, but I'm sure you have good reasons to do it.
There's some content of mine that I never rewatch because it's just like it's like the Johnny Depp thing. It's like it's weird to watch yourself do stuff, but when it's something that's like where there's a lot of contentious contention, or something where a lot of people seem to think I did something wrong, I go back and I try to figure out where that's coming from and what I can do to improve what I did wrong and stuff like that. And if there's, and whether or not it's something totally different that maybe people are,
Yeah.
I don't know. I used to be a writer, and there was this saying that was, if people, if people read something and they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong on how to fix it, but they're almost
Hmm.
right. They're almost always right that there's something wrong. They just don't usually know what, because they're not like a writer. So they will say like, I hated this thing, and it's like, okay, well, you should do this. It's like, okay, well, ignore that part, but find out what it was that they were bothered by, and if there's something that you can do about that. Um, so I do try to do that, and I have watched it, and there was 4 separate times where I explicitly said like, "Hey, like, I want to, like, let's end this." Like I don't want to have this conversation. But there was a you have to answer this, that you have to answer this question. I need you to answer this question, was like the terminology that was used over and over again. And so it got to the point where I felt like I was being severely inquisitive. And I think that the language that was used there was very rational for me to come to that conclusion. For me to conclude that I'm being told like, you have to answer this question, and there's an implicit threat, or what? You know what I mean? I have
But
to
I
answer. You
wonder,
need
it
I
seemed like she was feeling threatened too, right? Like just to Steelman here, like it seemed like she was feeling threatened too because she felt like your tone was, and I mean, and I you know this, right? Like lots of women are just very sensitive to getting talked down to. So
Yeah, I mean, I
so
think
she
there
was
was
probably
parts
feeling
where that
shitty too.
was mutual. Like, I mean, I think for me, the first part where I know that I identified that I got really defensive, I even talk about this in my response video.
Hmm.
Like, I felt really defensive when I was told that, like, right, like, at the beginning, it's like, "Oh, well, like, you need to be responsible with your platform, so I need you to answer this question, because if you're not, then you're putting out bad information or whatever." And I'm like, uh I feel like that, I felt like that was really out of line. And then that's where the line where I was like, well, you're being cringe right now. And so that was a little bit sarcastic and sassy and whatever. And I acknowledge that. It was
Hmm.
a defensive thing to say. But also, there was never any point where I implied that like her platform was bad, that she was a dangerous person. And that was not returned to me. And there was this continual pushing to make me answer questions, even though I'm like, I don't want to have this conversation. Let's have this another time. There was one point where I literally said, I'm at hour 9 of my stream. So I'd really like to not have a debate at this time of night when I'm 9
Yeah.
hours into a stream, but it couldn't happen. And uh while I acknowledge that, like, I should have ended the call, like, forcibly, and that's what was said, like, "Oh, you should." Well, then, if the defense that when people brought up, like, "Hey, like, Demon Mama did try to end the call multiple times," was, "Well, Mama should have just hung up." But I think you can understand, like, I don't know. I just always ask people when people bring that up to me, I'm like, okay, say you're having an argument with your friend and you hang up the phone. You probably just totally fucked up your relationship with your friend. If you're having an argument with your friend and you just fucking hang up the phone, that's a bad call, right? Like I
Hmm.
think that's if you get hung up on, that's considered a pretty major slight. But this is more, even worse than that, because I had 150 people watching and she
You are on
had
stream.
150 people watching. So there's like, it's not only that I'm making a show for people and like what I hang up and then all of a sudden just end the show. Like it's not very in my opinion, that's a very uncomfortable position to be in, especially when you ask 4 times and there's no answer. And I recognize now that, like, yes, I should have. But it's also kind of like it's kind of weird to me, like when somebody tells you, "Oh, you should have just forced me out of the call." Like, well, maybe you shouldn't have been like creating those circumstances in the first place.
Yeah,
Um
like there's,
and
she was putting pressure on you to continue the conversation and also
yeah.
implying that you were doing something really dangerous. So, like, so I can understand that, yeah, she saw it as like, this is really important. This has to, and she probably wasn't thinking, like, I'm crossing someone's boundaries.
Yeah.
And, but in a way, she still did. But, like, so I want to get into, one of the criticisms that you brought up that she
Sure.
had about
Yeah.
her specifically saying that you were irresponsible, you were being irresponsible with your platform, or you were
Mhm.
continuing to be, I think. um
Yeah.
so I'm guessing you don't think that you've been irresponsible with your platform
Not at
about
all.
this topic, but are there any situations, like, in the past, that you feel like you could have done better, or you have been irresponsible, I guess, like, with this unique platform you have?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a few times actually. But the one that I always remember because it was such a huge learning moment for me was thankfully when I was a much smaller channel. I had a conversation with a sort of infamous Twitter ML. And I did not do enough research, and they actually spouted quite a lot of misinformation that I
Mm,
didn't catch because I didn't know. Because I was too wait at that point I was like too trusting, and I didn't take it as seriously, and I actually got called out really hard by a bigger streamer out of the blue. And after that, like I was pretty embarrassed, but I literally was like, at the end of it, I was like, "Hey, I really appreciate you calling me out on this. I need to think about it more, but I appreciate you holding me to task." And that actually changed my approach to interviews altogether. And
did they call
so that
you out in, like, a specific way that you were more open to taking it constructively?
To be honest, not
No.
really. I went on to just have a chat with them, and then they sprung it on me kind of out of nowhere. So they kind of pulled a dirty move. But again, like it felt fair. It felt kind of fair to me because I was like, yeah, I did fuck up. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm also like, I'm 30, so I have like a little bit of a
Same.
of an age. Yeah. Oh, sick. Like I have a little bit of an age advantage over a lot of people in the streaming world. So I've taken a lot of like tough pills in my life leading up to this
Yeah.
point. And as a result, it was like, okay, yeah, I can see that I was wrong there. I'm a little bit faster than a lot of people to admit when they're wrong. But that was one where it was like, yeah, I think I'm glad that I didn't do that. I'm glad I learned that lesson when I was smaller before my platform was really meaningfully large. Because I wouldn't want to do that again. Um, and then I mean, I think that there was a fair criticism in the first little cancellation that happened. I was pretty spicy with the titling after the fact, and I
Mhm.
probably shouldn't have been that spicy. Like I don't know, like titling on YouTube is pretty
It's like
commonly a
flirting with
bit.
the devil, right? Because it
Yeah,
wants you to do something. It's incentivizing you to do something that you know is probably bad. But yeah.
yeah, I mean, like everybody does the clickbait stuff, and so I didn't really think of it much at that time. But I've been more careful with people who are like less deserving of ire. I still don't feel like, obviously I don't think that that justifies anything that happened, but I
Hmm.
have learned from that, and I think that, like, was I wrong on that? Yes. Did it justify me getting, like, did a YouTube like, title that was slightly uncharitable, justify I mean, they didn't even know about the YouTube channel when the manifesto was done, so it's not like what I did was actually, like, they were already firing back before I even did that thing, but at the same time, I would avoid, adding fire in that way in the future because I don't know, like, it was a little too much. And so I've learned quite a bit about that. And then of course, I mean, there's been a couple of times, again, a lot of these were earlier on, in my streaming career. There was a couple of times where like I went into a debate underprepared and I feel like I failed. There was one debate where I sort of jumped into a really spicy debate that was going on Chud Logic's channel, and I
Yeah,
fucked up my point really hard. And I don't think I was wrong, but I fucked up my point really hard.
that's happened to
And
me so many times. So
yeah,
I
and
totally get
and
that.
so it was one where I was like, "Ah, god damn it." Like, it's really hard to come back from that because if you are right, but you get the point wrong really bad, it's
You feel
really
like
hard
you've
to go
caused
back.
harm, right? As well,
Yeah,
because
and
you've given like this false impression. Yeah, I totally get that.
yeah, precisely. Yeah, you got it. And so those are some of the ones where I've felt like I've really done, like, I've fucked up and have had to go back and learn. And, like, I think there's probably gonna be, I mean, obviously, I imagine there's gonna be other mistakes I make in the future. Obviously, everybody does. But,
Hmm.
I've also learned a lot, and I've learned really quick, and, I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong. Um,
Yeah, I
and
wish more people were like that. I don't know. Like
yeah.
that I wish we would allow people to be wrong and not just assume like sometimes someone says something that's incorrect or sometimes like
Mhm.
someone I don't know. I've seen someone like post an article that they didn't realize was say like from like a turf website or something. Um
Yeah.
and everyone just like yells at them turf when in reality they were just wrong. Like they got and sent the wrong article and they're just incorrect,
Yeah.
and sometimes you just need to focus instead of like the moral aspect, just focus on like education, just correct the person, tell
Absolutely.
them why they're wrong.
Yeah. I definitely think there's a essentialization problem, specifically on Twitter, where people
Yeah.
get essentialized from, like, making a bad argument into being a thing. Um, and yeah, it's a mess. Yes. So yeah, I
So
feel you on that for sure.
what got you into like this whole debate universe, especially with YouTube and Twitch and stuff?
Um, well, it's a weird path. So, in the short, if you want the what actually got me into doing streaming specifically, that would be Vosh. To be completely honest, if I'm completely
I
honest,
hear it's pronounced Vaush, right? I'm
Vaush,
kidding. I'm kidding.
Vaush. Yeah. It's like so, no, Vosh, I was a big fan of Vosh, before I started streaming, like OG chatter back in the Twitch days. Followed Vosh for a long time, and then
What did you
by
like about him in particular?
well, there's a couple of things. Well, like, obviously, I've always been a fan of debate, like, um, a lot. Like, I used to
I can
debate
tell by the
with.
way you debate that, yeah, you're like a fellow debate nerd because it's fun, right? Yeah.
Yep, yeah, I'm a nerd. Now I've told people that I'm kind of a pit fighter in a lot of ways, in that, like, the type of debate I never did formal debate. I never did debate
Hmm.
team,
Yeah,
although I have
neither did I.
debated with. Yeah, I've debated with people who are on debate teams, so I've learned a bit of the way to engage, and I've learned a lot from that. My best friend for a long time was, like, a national level debate team person. Like, she was super good at that shit. She went to, like, a private school and did debate team and got to the national level and was, like, really good at that. So I had a lot of practice. Um, but, like, I mean, I used to debate. Like, I started arguing with, like, being really super. I mean, I was always told I was an argumentative child. Um, but when I was younger, like in my teens, my family, we had this. My family's really fucking weird. I will say that much. But we had this weird culture of arguing at family gatherings, and it was heavily encouraged. And the goal and the thing that was, like, constantly repeated, even though it was only true to a certain degree, was that, like, oh, you argue and then you sit down and have dinner together afterwards. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
are you
everybody's
Jewish
everybody's
by
good.
any chance? Because that's like a big Jewish tradition. It's very
I'm
common in
not,
Jewish households.
I'm not, believe it or not, but I would say there's some cultural overlap, at least family wise,
Yeah.
with my family. Because yeah, I've been asked that before, but it's like it was intense. We would get really intense, and I used to argue all kinds of stuff. I was actually at the time, because I grew up super conservative. I was actually um pretty fucking conservative, and I usually
Oh,
argue
wow.
from conservative
That's
positions
hard
when I
for
was
me
a
to
kid.
imagine. But
Yeah, I mean, it was well, I mean, that whole background is a whole thing. I'm actually working on a really big video that's gonna be a pretty huge deal for my channel, I'm hoping, soon, which is going to be talking about it was inspired by, are you familiar with Good Mythical Morning?
no.
The, YouTube channel? Okay, they're like they're like a massive YouTube channel. They used to be known by Rhett and Link. They're like famous, like massive YouTube channel, really, really cool. But they have a podcast called Ear Biscuits where they talk about more personal stuff. And uh last year they did a video called Our Spiritual Deconstruction. And basically they talked about um their experiences growing up really religious, and how they both like sort of independently came to not be religious anymore, and how it was this huge process. It was super amazing. And it resonated with me a lot because I grew up in extremist Christian sect, a
Mhm.
cult, frankly. And there was a lot that resonated with me, even though their story was even less intense than mine. But we went through a lot of similar like arcs, in this process of leaving this extremist religion and all this stuff. So I'm doing my own. And I've talked about it before on stream, but never in like one big session. So that's going to be coming up eventually. I'm going to be doing the Demon Mama spiritual deconstruction, where I'm going to walk through like what I grew up with, what it was like being in the church, how I came to challenge those beliefs and grow as a person, and then how I left the church and left the faith entirely and came to become a lot happier as a result of that. Um, but
Yeah,
it's
for
going to be a
me, I
very
was
in-depth
also a
thing.
part of like this kind of Jewish, very like Orthodox kind of cult like environment. And for me, like the biggest thing that pushed me out of it, because I think I've always had like this, I guess, conservative instinct, just in the philosophical like way, that I
Mhm.
like tradition, I like just inherently, and I like habits and an intense
Yeah.
structure like around my life. It's like something that I really enjoy, and so Orthodox Judaism provided that. So in a way, like I should have stayed in terms of those instincts, but the way women were treated in that world, it was just like, especially like the, if you think that the West is gender essentialist, like you should go to this universe. I'm telling you, like they literally put up fences like at weddings where the bride can't dance with her husband.
Yeah.
So I was literally segmented and away from any population of so-called men. And yeah, the shit that they put on you and everything, like I was just like, holy I cannot live my life like this.
Yeah, it's interesting too because it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things I'm going to be talking about is one of the areas where my story differs pretty majorly from like the one of like the Good Mythical Morning guys, because one of the
Mm-hmm.
things they talked about, and they touched on this as well, which made me go like, wow, like actually super interesting to hear somebody else's perspective, because they were like, a lot of people, they one of the things they talked about was like a lot of people have like traumatic moments associated with the church, which was definitely true for myself.
Yep.
And they were like, something that bothered me for a long time is like I didn't really ever have that. And it wasn't until this like they talked about how because they did a year follow-up, and they talked about how they kind of had been thinking one of the things they wanted to touch on in their follow-up to it was how they never really realized that like it bothered them, that they're like, so many people have had this traumatic experience, but to me it wasn't like that. And then, specifically Rhett was like, but I came to realize like the church had been built for me. It had been built for white, straight, cis guys. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, all I got was good stuff. It didn't end up being fitting, and I'm happy that I'm not a part of it anymore, because for me it's like I it was bothering me that it wasn't true. There were these truth issues that were guiding me through this. But for a lot of other people, their critique starts before they ever even get to talk about the truth thing, because they have these experiences. And it is
Mm-hmm.
interesting that you say that, because like there were certain things about um like life and reality that I had to relearn in a different context that were things that benefited me in the church. For example, like, I mean, I'm a pretty ambitious person, right? And like, I am kind of a little bit of a workaholic, and this, like, the Christian work ethic was very much a part of me, and that sort of stuff is rewarded in the church. Um and as a result, like, there was this period of my life where I really struggled to find direction and purpose and motivation, because previously there had been this god and there was this fire in me. Like, I used to describe myself like I was the paladin class. I was like, I'm ready, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do great things in the name of God. Like, I'm going to go
Yep.
make movies that are for the glory of God. And so these things were like, they fueled me really well, but I couldn't coexist with the church being uh queer,
Yep.
frankly. I didn't belong. Their gender prescriptions were totally fucked for me, because of course most of my time in the church was before transition. I was very unhappy and I chafed at the things that they wanted me to be and do. And then also, I had friends who were gay, and I realized that this church was pressuring me to hate them, and I didn't want to hate them. And so I found myself struggling. Like, I mean, there was this moment that I talked about a couple times on stream where I remember it was right before I stopped believing in religion altogether, and a friend of mine who is super close came out to me, and I remember having like almost a um panic attack. I was standing in this football pitch, like a soccer pitch, and I was walking and talking on the phone with my friend, and she came out to me, and I was like, my mouth went dry. I was like panicking, because I was like happy for her. I was super happy for her, but there was this part of my mind that was like, but the religion. And that was such like an emotional shock for me, of going like, no, I'm happy and I'm going to choose and I chose in that moment to kind of defy my religious instinct, which was a revolutionary moment for me. Yeah, it was
And
like
that's so
somebody in
hard
chat just said God
too.
is one.
Like
Yeah.
that must have been like so hard because your family is probably entrenched really deeply in it. Were there any consequences for you, like by leaving it, like at least on an
Yes.
outwardly?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. In fact, uh, you're getting the deep cuts here, the deep demon mama lore, but I guess that's what these sorts of things are
Yeah.
for, right? But like, in fact, the name demon mama partially comes from the repercussions of that event. When I came out to my family, and decided I was going to leave the church, because obviously transition in the church is impossible. So these things were entrenched. You know what I mean? I could never be
Hmm.
who I was and also
Were
coexist with
you
a church
coming
that,
out as trans at that moment?
yes, came
Okay.
out as trans. Yep. And I had already sort of been distancing myself from the church at that point, but not from the faith entirely. So it was kind of like, I could kind of keep it quiet and be like, oh yeah, I've been doing my reading and everything like that, because I'm away from home at college and
Hmm.
whatever. Um, and but it's impossible to disentangle those things. When you're in a church that tells you that gay people are evil, and trans people especially are like, whoa, what the fuck are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, they were
Did they even
totally against
teach
that.
you what trans people were? Like, was there any image that you'd grown up with of associated with that?
Nothing. In fact, it was so wild that, like, I mean, it was so wild. Like, the only image I ever had of at all of trans people whatsoever, until I went to college and got out of the bubble and met other people, was a one night when I was traveling with my dad. Um, and I think this happened when we were in Germany. My dad fell asleep with the TV on, and I kept watching because I couldn't sleep. And a documentary about intersex people came on, and I was like, "The fuck?" And I was like, "That exists? Like, what?"
Yeah.
And so I couldn't stop watching it, and that was stuck in my head forever. But it didn't make sense because obviously, like, I was, I'm not, like, as far as I know, like, I'm not intersex. But like, but I was like, well, like, there was a resonance there with with the stories that were being told in that, but I didn't have any idea that trans people were even thing. I didn't even know the words. Because, again, Christian bubble.
Yeah. How did you get the
And
language to kind of to learn how to describe how you were feeling?
um Well, it was very strange because what happened was, I had a very close friend who came out to me, and you'll notice I had 2 friends come out to me, one is gay and one is trans,
Hmm.
and both of those were hugely influential on me, but the friend who came out to me as trans, um, like, we had been friends for some time, and we were super aligned, like, there was so much similarities between
Hmm.
us, and, and when they were telling me the story, I was like, there was this part it was really funny, and I laugh about it. I'm like, well, like I feel that way. Like, why are you worrying so much about it? And then there was just this like literal awkward silence, and then I was like, oh, and so there was this really awkward moment there, and then I started to learn from her all of this stuff about being trans, and that was the first time I'd ever even known this world existed. I was the first time I ever knew any of it. I didn't even know that there was HRT. The only thing I'd ever heard of was like pop culture, like cross-dressing kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and I could my it's like everything just clicked into line. It was like it made sense all of a sudden to me in this way that was like, so this is what I've been fucking suffering with all this time. And there had actually like, I mean, of course there'd been all kinds of other things that had happened in my life that I had no way to express them at all. Like I was struggling with gender at age 9. At that was like that not even before that, to be completely honest, but it was very when I was younger, um my family had this weird thing where like when I was super young, we weren't super religious, and then we joined the cult and
Yeah.
it got super bad. So when I was super young, my parents just let me do whatever. And like I had basically no gender friction when I was super young. Very, very little. Um and then it became this whole thing where all of a sudden once we got into the religion, there was a lot of attention put on the way that I was, because I when I was young, my best friend, my two first best friends for the entire first like 10 years of my life were girls, and I spent time with them all the time. I played with their toys. We had our own things, and of course, like I'm not like a like obviously I had my own things that I was interested in. I wasn't like I don't believe in like gender essentialism or anything
Hmm.
like that, but there was this we were very, very like as far as emotionally and the way that they had been socialized, we we communicated a lot. And that suddenly stopped to be allowed, you know what I mean? As scrutiny was put on me as I got older. And then it started to become very apparent to me at 9 that there was like things wrong. And I remember learning about puberty in like middle schools or era,
That
when the
must have been
classes were
terrifying,
it
like
was
learning
yeah,
about it.
it was weird for me because I was like, I want like it was like looking at a catalog, and I'm like, I want that one. And I used to pray to God that I would have a female puberty. And that didn't make any sense to me. You know what I mean? I just thought, okay, like whatever. And I actually remember a there was a moment with one of my friends where I told them like we had like a sleepover, and I was talking about like we were just hanging out talking about random shit, and I was like, do you ever wish you were a girl? And they like weird chant me really hard. And I was like, nah, I was just kidding. Like, never
Yeah.
mind. you know? And it was like, but it was like literally like a real life weird chant moment. They were just like, and I'm like, okay, nobody else thinks like this. I get it. I get it. Just kidding. Bye. And then I like, but again, no words to describe that. So I just thought I was a little weird, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, when I got those words, when I finally connected with somebody who was trans and they were a friend, not like a very close friend, somebody who we talked about everything,
And someone you
it like
admire as well, right?
yeah, precisely. Yeah, somebody who like was instrumental in me escaping the like sort of mental traps of religion as well, because they were willing to like because we had so much rapport, even though we had very different beliefs at that point. We would talk for hours into the night about philosophy, about religion. We would go back and forth. And so it only made sense that after that we would talk about gender as well. And I learned all this stuff, and they gave me resources, and they connected with me with people, and I was able to talk to a psychologist about it until my family found out, and then it was really bad.
Yeah.
And yeah, the repercussions from that were pretty severe. To tie it back around, I kind of went on a tangent there, but the name Demon Mama came from the fact that once my family started finding out, of course, the flavor of debates at family dinners would change, and there was a lot of awkwardness and some really weird moments and stuff. But there was this one time where I was arguing about the Bible, and I knew the Bible real well. In fact, like arguably, I was one of the most like previously pious people in my family.
Mhm.
And we got into this one argument, and it was like literally a 5v1. I had like my aunt, my grandma, two of my cousins, and another one of my aunts. And one of my aunts was like, I can't help but feel like you're a servant of Satan who's been sent to
No
confuse
way.
us with all your
Did she
nonsense.
really say
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, she literally said that. And that's where I got the demon name, because after that I was like, okay, like that's too funny like for me to like, so I started
So
using
that's literally
demon in
what
a
you
lot of
said.
my
You
different.
wear it as a shield. That
Yep,
makes sense.
wore it as a shield. Yeah. And yeah, they said I was like a servant of Satan, and because I was stumping them because they didn't know the Bible very well. Like, let's be real, most people don't. Most people who believe it don't really actually research it. But me, I've got my, and it's going to be up on my shelf. I have a fucking monster four edition side by side study Bible that I was planning on, like that was going to be that was my guiding book. I carried it with me like to every place that I went. It's marked up with notes. Like I was very serious about religion, and so for them, like, it was threatening, the idea that, like, the most pious person in the family no longer believed. But I think that's how it goes sometimes. When the further you dig into some of these religious texts, the more you start to think about them and you find problems with
Yeah,
them.
and you
Yeah.
start seeing all the issues where it's not like consistent, and yeah, like for me it was just like Judaism puts this huge focus on eating kosher and all these like little details of your life and how much
Nope.
God cares about that. And when one of the big things for me was just I'm learning about this all-powerful God, yet somehow he cares so much that I wait 6 hours after I eat a milk product, sorry, after I eat a meat product to eat a milk product. I was like,
Yeah.
this makes no sense. Like, it's just not disparaging anyone who believes in that, but for me it was just, yeah, that I can totally see that.
Yeah.
I wanted
And there
to, sorry,
Go
yeah,
ahead,
you could
sorry. No,
continue.
please go.
um how do you think that, like, this experience that you had growing up, do you think that it impacted your current politics at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to have life experience that don't impact your politics to a certain
Hmm.
degree. But I think it's very complex as to how it did. Certainly, it gave me an insight into indoctrination, um, which now I encourage all people of all political walks. But being that I mostly run in left circles, I encourage a lot of lefties to really come to understand how indoctrination actually functions and how people are indoctrinated into things, how what it does to your mental state. Because people don't really get it very well. I think there's like one of the things that drives me nuts. I think you've probably seen these things on Twitter, but there's like these takes that are like, um, oh, like former ex like should be ashamed, and then like you shouldn't talk, they shouldn't talk to them, shouldn't be allowed in
Hmm.
spaces. There's like the other thing of like the Michael Moore tweeting about like fuck red states and all this shit like that, and like they should die and not have COVID, and the memes, like the memes that are
Yeah,
just like, oh, people are irredeemably bad if they've ever done anything wrong. And I think that there's this sort of like conceptual for a lot of people that like our opinions are like we like choose them like we're choosing products at a store, like that you have a whole lot of control in them. But the reality is that while that's true for people who are liberated and educated, um
that's a
if you
privilege in a
it
in
is a certain
reality.
type of privilege. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Being able to have access to other worldviews is somewhat of a privilege. And that doesn't mean that we don't discourage the bad behavior, that we don't fight against it. But it does mean that like when you're looking at people who are still a part of those worldviews, especially when it's really super traditionalistic and it's really super dogmatic and religious. People don't know those ideologies are designed in such a way that they encase your mind. And the thing that I always tell people about, that I heard all the time in my church growing up, which people laugh because this is a line that's used in Warhammer 40K, because I think somebody from Warhammer 40K probably grew up in a church similar to mine. Somebody who wrote some of that, but they said that an open mind is like a fortress with the front door open. That's what they would say all the time. The idea is that you need to build a fortress of scripture and a fortress of religious practice and teachings around your mind, and you need to shut the gate, because if you let things in, it will corrupt you. It will corrupt what you're thinking. So it's
It's one of the
literally.
reasons why these communities are always so insular.
Yes, yeah, they are. And they work in weird ways, but the whole point is that once you're into them, they start to slowly put those bricks together, and they insulate you using these thought. A big part of it is like thought terminating cliches, like discouraging critical thought, and they literally wither those parts of your mind over time, so that you don't engage with critical ideas. You could scream, somebody could be screaming the truth at you, and it would bounce right off because you have an like a shell around your brain of religious faith and ideas, and they bounce off. And a lot of times, once a crack gets in, that person will eventually leave. But the thing that they try to do is make sure there's never a crack,
Well,
ever.
this is why I like this debate world so much. Like, even though it can be
Mhm.
toxic, it could be unhealthy for our mental health. It can often lead to like the most unproductive conversations. Like, we've all been there, right?
Yeah,
But the other side is even the worst of the worst still teaches you how to be critical, right? It still
yeah.
encourages you to be critical, and it's just such an important skill set to leading a healthy life.
Yeah, and I do think there are like lots of fair critiques of the of debate spaces. In fact, we're going to be going over one a bit later. I think there's a lot of fair critique of like the blood sportiness of
Hmm.
online debate. And I do agree that most of online debate is primarily for entertainment and fun. But uh uh I do think that there's a lot of people who have those cracks in their ideology like shell, that they might see a debate and it might widen that crack because they hear something that they've never heard before. They hear a position they've never heard before. They're allowed to think and chew on something that otherwise wouldn't have been in their mind. And so I do think there's value in debate for that, and that's part of the reason why I'm very passionate about it. In addition to me just having a lot of fun debating people, I do think there's limitations, and I tend to be pretty critical of like speech, like like when people say they're like de-radicalizing people or whatever. I don't really believe that like it's the role of online people or radio people or whatever to
Hmm.
de-radicalize. I don't think it really doesn't usually work. However, it what can be helpful, and I know this from personal experience, in addition to knowing a lot of other people. Then part of it's anecdotal, is that once the cracks are there, if you're one of those people who's like leaving or almost about to leave, or you've just left, or you're even left after a while but you haven't really found new things to think about, and you're still sort of drifting with all these unfinished questions, the debate spaces can actually do a lot for people like that, to help them find a new place and build better ideas for themselves that can lead them to be a lot happier. And uh, so I do think there's value in that. I do think that people are a little bit too gung ho sometimes, saying, "Oh yeah, we're like de-radicalizing people online." In reality, if people are truly radicalized, there is nothing that an online person can do to put a crack in their shell. Most likely, there might be some random opportunities, but in reality, most of the time, to get out of to start the process of escaping indoctrination, you need people in your life. You need people who are emotionally close to you, who
Yep.
can be really patient and chip away very carefully and very gently and very lovingly, um, at that shell that you build. And I think that's true for cults. I think that's true for QAnon. I think that's true for extreme conspiracy theory. The whole point is that they get you into a point where you are resistant to television. You're resistant to they design it's designed that way. And that is one thing I wish that a lot of people would learn. It is something that I think is most influenced. Like, do you know, your original question was about, what parts of life really influence my politics? That's one of them. Is this idea that like indoctrination is super, super dangerous to me. And I think that um especially like real indoctrination, not just internet indoctrination. I'm talking the type of indoctrination that uh that people experience when they're isolated into a church or into a certain type of hyper insular culture. I think a lot of times that, like, for example, one type of indoctrination that a lot of people in America have, that I think has led massively to our to the situation we're in right now, is like Rush Limbaugh. And you might
Mm.
not think it, but Rush Limbaugh was basically a radio preacher for every single area of the United States that's rural. Rush Limbaugh was basically the only entertaining show on the radio for 2 decades, free to every single person, pitched specifically to people who are bored listening at their job, while they're farming, while they're mowing their grass, whatever. And a lot of people would tune into his show and hear the same ideas repeated with extreme emotion behind them, with extreme intensity and severity and concern behind them, and then they would be directed towards further extreme uh uh radio stations and media, and it became insular for a lot of places, because again, if you and everybody you know also listens to it, well, it's just like tuning into the preacher online, you know what I mean?
Mm.
So yeah. Yeah.
This is just like the problem in general with the internet, how people tend to retreat into their echo chambers. My answer to that,
Yep.
like a few years ago, when I first got into this debating world, I was primarily on Discord, and the purpose was to debate Nazis out of was to de-radicalize, right? To debate Nazis out
Yeah.
of Holocaust denial. That was like always my initial goal, and I just had this idealistic concept because I never met Holocaust deniers in Canada because it's illegal here. But so I was like, oh, like if I meet them, like, you know, and I just give them facts and logic, right, and evidence, like, you know, they'll change their mind. And sure, like some people did change their mind, particularly really young people, like teenagers. But the majority of them didn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it also, like, I did it for a straight year, and it got grating on my mental health because, of course, I couldn't tell them that I was Jewish, because if I said that I was Jewish, they're not going to believe a word out of my mouth, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
and they'll probably hurt you.
yeah. So at the time I was like, I was literally a crypto Jew. So I had to be quiet about that. And that just, like, all of that stuff just really started to grate on me mentally, because, you know, it just got exhausting. And it's why, like, it's not up to people who are part of like an oppressed group to de-radicalize. While it is a really nice thing, yeah, it does. It puts so much pressure on you. And I don't think anyone should feel like it's their job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, there is massive Jewish and trans solidarity.
Oh yeah.
And I encourage that so much. But I mean, and you say crypto Jew, like I'm like, yeah, I've been crypto trans many times myself.
Yeah.
Like that's so there is like
No,
a
yeah, it
lot
does
of.
totally intersect, right? Because
Yeah,
yeah, like,
it really does. And I mean, of course, like even historically, and I don't, I don't want to like go out to another topic, but I mean, for a while, I had a job where I wrote social media posts, for a synagogue or for a temple, and it was super awesome for me because like I found a lot of and they were more progressive, not super orthodox. But there was a lot of I felt very inspired by a lot of the stuff that I learned during that time because I was like, holy shit, like Jewish people in America have had a very similar treatment where there's a lot of being like sort of being isolated and being left out of the rest of society, of having to be secretive in certain circumstances, of having the normalization of like certain types of comedy and stereotypes of having to look out for one another. I mean, like historically, if you look at the history of trans people in America, like the way like trans people build networks, like quiet networks that nobody else even knows about,
mm,
that exist, that you just help each other because otherwise nobody, the discrimination is so much that you'll spend your whole life trying to find a job. But if you have a friend who's trans who manages to find a workplace that's trans friendly, well then they can give all their friends jobs, you know what I mean? And it's like there's this whole thing of, and again, that's why I always say like the solidarity is so fucking important because there is a lot of shared history in that way.
yeah, and I feel
um
like we have this unique experience because sometimes you can be visually Jewish and sometimes you're not visually Jewish.
mhm,
And yeah, it totally depends on multiple factors. And sometimes people can also like minimize. I've often felt, obviously, I get anti-Semitism from the right, and I'm sure you get
yeah,
transphobia from the right. But I often feel
fuck
like
those.
I get some shit from the left where they kind of like diminish my experience as a Jewish person, because of, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of how, you know, like there's like a turf narrative, and just like, yeah, I would just warn you, this is a turf narrative if anyone
Yeah,
feels
yeah,
uncomfortable with that. Um, there's a turf narrative that, especially trans women who grew up presenting as, I guess, men. I don't know the
Mhm.
right terminology of that. I'm sorry if I use the wrong thing,
No, no, you're
but
fine.
yeah, presenting as men, that they've lived with this male privilege, right, and thus like don't know what it's like, right,
Yeah.
and I've heard the exact same thing kind of subscribe to Jews, right? Like that it's like you've lived your whole life, sometimes especially with American Jews. I'm not American, but
Mhm.
you've lived your whole life like subscribed with a specific kind of privilege. And especially like you sometimes get passed as white and all of this stuff, right? Or like in
Yeah.
that category. But there's this entire internal world that's going on there,
Yeah.
that you're always aware that you are other, right?
Yep.
And yeah,
Oh,
and that shit
100%.
is very unique.
And if you'd like, I can actually talk about this a little bit because like I'm
Oh
I'm
yeah, for
perfectly
sure.
fine with talking frankly on this subject because this is something that gets talked about a lot. And I know some people are really weird about talking about it, and understandably so. But like the idea of like trans people having like male privilege or whatever.
Mhm.
Like I've talked pretty frankly about my experiences before and after transition. I mean, I did a whole segment a couple of weeks ago where I got off on some rant. I was talking with chat and I started talking about my experience in sales. And I have a sort of a unique experience, which is that I succeeded really well in sales pre-transition, and then I moved to a different location, transferred locations, transitioned full time, and then also succeeded in sales presenting as a woman. And it was a totally different experience, and I had to learn a
Mhm.
completely different way. I still did it, but it was super difficult. And so, um, but another thing that people don't acknowledge ever is that like, um, people have like misogynists have a nose for finding people who don't quite fit. And
Yep.
I never really passed as a guy. Like yes, was I a guy when people have said, "Yeah, you're oh yeah, that's a guy, whatever." Before I transitioned, sure, of course, that visually. But my entire life was rife with bullying. My own family, like were like three different points in my life where there was like gay scares about me, even
Yeah.
though I have never been attracted to men. I've always been attracted to women, still am. I mean, there are some men that I find attractive because whatever, you know what I mean. But I was
Yeah.
never like openly. Um, and so, but nonetheless, there was this moment where I got interrogated by my dad just out of nowhere. It's like, "Oh, are you gay?" And it's like, no." And it's like, "Well, why are you doing this, that, and the other thing?" And it's like, "Okay, I don't know how to explain that to you. It's just like who I am and whatever." And then there was another time where some a friend like hijacked my Facebook and said like I'm gay, you know what I mean, like the kind of like bullshit high school people get up to.
Mhm.
And I literally didn't even notice until because we were doing shit, and I got a phone call from my dad who was in international waters because he was on a cruise at the time. So I was like, why the fuck is my dad calling me? He's not supposed to, like, he never calls. It's expensive as fuck. And he paid all the extra to call me and interrogate me because he'd gotten an emergency call from my aunt who said it happened. It finally happened. And I was like,
Wow.
no one else in my family got this treatment ever. No one did. But I did. And it's like, is that like, is being constantly like treated like that? Is that like male privilege? No, these people have a nose for it. And I think that that's, and again, like I don't know exactly because I'm not Jewish. I don't know how that compares exactly, but there was a certain resonance in you saying that like there are times where you pass and there are other times where you don't, but you're always aware of the otherness.
Yep.
And I was always aware of the otherness. If I can tell one other quick anecdote on this
For
point,
sure.
I'll give. I think people would love to hear this one. So when I was like towards the end of high school, my church had this book came out that was a sequel to a really well, or like a side quel to a really popular book that had been written by a Christian guy that had swept the nation in the past. The book was called The Captive Heart, and it was a side quel to this other book that was called Wild at Heart. And Wild at Heart was like the subtitle was like a man's the definitive man's guide to being a Christian man. And then Captive Heart was the definitive woman's guide to being a Christian woman. And I read The Captive Heart as it was, popularly spreading through the church, and I read the Wild at Heart first. Um, and I had a serious, like, multi-week, uh, bout of, like, severe depression, um, because nothing in that book made any sense to me at all. But everybody else who I knew was like ranting and raving about how awesome it was. The pastors were talking about stuff about how this relevant the shit is. And I didn't feel like anything in there was even remotely close to my experience or how I viewed myself or what I thought about.
Yeah.
And um and then I read The Captive Heart, and a lot of it did resonate with me. And again, I had no words to explain this. And so at the time, I kind of thought, well, maybe I just have a unique insight. Maybe I'm just really good at understanding, like women or something. And, but again, like, and then I stopped reading them altogether because I was like, this is causing me like mental dissonance. I need to focus on school. Like, this is
Yeah.
killing me right now. And like, literally, I mean, I can't even explain. It was so painful. Like, to read that book and like to be panicking about like, oh, I don't want to talk about this with anybody because I'm going to have very different answers than them, and I know that I am. And that was one of those such examples where I had no words to explain this whatsoever, but it was like a painful amount of dissonance. Um, and Yeah, so that's another example of that sort of thing where it's just like, yeah, like there were things in my upbringing that put me on a very different path where it was like I just knew I couldn't put words to it, but I knew that I wasn't the same as everybody else.
Yeah, and
And
you know that when people are talking about the privileges of men, and all that stuff, like, there's probably a sense of feeling like, that they're not really talking about you, right?
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
mean, you don't, because like obviously it's to a slightly lesser degree, because I mean, I do believe that like you can benefit from some certain types of like male privilege when you pass as male before transition, but they're very conditional. They're incredibly conditional, and if anybody finds out that there's something up, it disappears like that, like
Mhm.
instantly. Like for example, one such example is I do believe that like pre-transition, I think I excelled to certain degrees at sales, because there is so much misogyny in the sales industry that just even appearing to be male gave me an advantage.
Mhm.
Even though I was very different and there was a lot of shit that happened that was like, okay, but even that appearance makes you get treated different because most of the people that you're going to be talking with and working with, they never actually get to know you. They never find out that you're kind of, weird and sensitive and whatever or whatever other things. They never find that out because you're just talking to them and they see you when you're talking as a man, and then you are able to benefit from that. I talked about this in the sales stream that I did in more depth, but like got like men, like the average boomer man that you encounter working in a sales job that you're going to be talking to and trying to sell to, they 100% believe and reinforce the like guys club. They treat men so differently than they treat women, and that became unbelievably apparent after I transitioned because I couldn't sell the way that I used to. You don't get to,
What
and
was the
you
first
don't.
thing you noticed when you transitioned?
Uh,
Like in
the
terms of how
first
the world treated you?
I mean, the very first thing was that you don't get to be an equal anymore. And that was very weird and very shocking. Because obviously I had felt like there were times where people like were trying to like, you when you get the feeling that you're being strong-armed and like somebody really wants to feel like they're on top of you, the customer
Hmm.
service like, you know, but never to the same degree. Um you cannot sell presenting as a woman with confidence. You have to sell with deference. It's very weird. And I mean, you can have a certain form of confidence, but it has to be like confidence in deference. It's like I did an exercise with my stream where I did my sales pitch, what that I would have given when I was outwardly seen as a guy, and my sales pitch that I would make money with as a when I was presenting as a woman, and this was they're worlds of different. One is totally differential, and you have to, or they just won't buy from you. You just won't make money, so you have to do it.
Mhm.
If you just stubbornly refuse, your numbers will suffer, and then you lose your job.
I
And
also
so
feel
you
like
have
there's
to be
such
like,
a lower threshold as well, like in the debate world for what when you're considered a quote unquote debate bro. Like for me, like I got called a debate bro just when I, questioned someone's belief, and asked them for
yeah,
like some evidence. And I was like, whoa, I don't even feel like I'm being a debate bro, but I guess I don't know. Like I have no clue, but I'm assuming that maybe it had to do with some inherent like misogyny that they just weren't used to, a woman act like talking like that.
oh, 100%. One of the experiences that so yes, 100% on that. Um, I noticed very early on in my career of streaming that any aggression at all, or even standing up for yourself, even in the slightest, if you don't
Mhm.
like sort of bow down and just take it on the head, then you will be called a bitch. You will be called like a fucking. You'll be so annoying. You'll be called overly aggressive. Like I'm let's like again, I'm a OG Vosh fan. I
Mhm.
remember old Vosh. Like Vosh is much kinder to the people he debates these days. Vosh used to be a fucking mega debate bro. Super come in super hot. Like he would start a conversation off by I just watched one the other day and he started the debate off. He was like, "Well, I'm glad we can get the pleasantries out right now because I'm guessing that by the end of this conversation you're not going to feel very nice about me." And that's how he started a conversation with somebody he'd never talked to before. If I ever did that, I would be I mean, I don't even need to do that. I just debate at all, and I am told that I'm the most bad faith, emotional, screeching, I've been everything. You just name it. Every single thing is like, Demon Mama is the most obnoxious. She just screeches. She's like super bad faith and just manipulative. And it's like, okay, you're just reciting stereotypes at this
Well,
point.
I also
And it's
wonder
like,
like how much we women like further perpetuate these stereotypes ourselves, right? Like that
yeah,
internalization of it. Like I know that when you and I first had that debate, the whole time I was like, "Oh, like you're so smart, you're so cool. I'm so excited to get to debate you." And then we disagreed on one thing, and I felt like you just like strawman me and talked down to me, and I was kind of hurt by it. And when I really thought about it, I'd gone and strawmanned and or talked down to you like a bunch, right? But for some reason, it stood out to me when you did it, and I think like there was like, it was probably like yeah, some internalized misogyny of being like, oh my god, like the other woman in this conversation is doing this to me.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it does happen. Another thing that's like sort of a little different that happens all the time, is well, here's one that somebody from chat just brought up. Gay Fresh from my chat says, the thing that I hear most is like people go, "Oh, this person's just a clone of Vosh," but they like Vosh and they hate me for some reason, and it's like, how's that line up? But the other one that
yeah.
happens is, like we had a meme for a while on the channel, of we had this, in fact, I think we still have the command. There was a command called bingo, and it would bring up a bingo card that would go to the things that most commonly got told straight to my face. There it is. Yep, it's still there. The bingo card is still there. Of all the stuff that I would get told, and the one that was the free space was "you talk too much," because no matter how much or how little I talked, I would always be told that I talked too much. And that one happens all the time. And it's like that's been studied. Like
That's
you
like
could
my number
literally,
one anxiety, like feeling
yeah.
like I'm gonna talk too much in this instance, like especially on those panels. Like I'm always thinking I need to make my intro as short as possible. I need to make my point as concise as possible because I just don't want to take up too much of the space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's my advice. My one advice to you is fucking pitch it out the window. Take as much time as you want. And
Just
guess
say
what?
fuck
Even
that.
if you, yeah, say fuck it. Even if you do take too much time, who cares? So do the dudes do this fucking shit all the time. Like literally, there will be panels where fuck people will people who weren't even invited, dude streamers who weren't even invited to the panel will crash a panel and take over the entire panel, talk for the entire panel, and no one else gets to talk, and no one will bat an eye. So I say fuck it. I don't even care anymore. I like laugh when people say that shit at me now. Because I just realized that like if I don't elbow my way in and become like and embrace being like, they're gonna call me an obnoxious bitch if I say one word during the panel. So I might as well say 100 words and get my
Mhm.
word out.
Well,
So,
yeah, we
yeah.
had I don't know if you saw this, but I had like this debate with Destiny, Vosh, and Vivian, and just like a few people about platforming, and most of the debate ended up being about like this list that I'd gotten, this like fascist list I'd accidentally been put on. And even
Yeah.
though like the debate's literally about an experience I've had, I think I got to talk like, I don't know, like an eighth of what everyone else got to talk about. It was just such as, and I kept being told, oh, you got to interrupt, you got to interrupt, you got to do it. But it's like, it was just so hard for me to teach myself to do that stuff.
Yeah. Just remember that, like, you have the science on your side. Like, you can actually, I can't even remember the name of the study, but if you look it up, if you look up like there was a big study that was done about this, about how not only do men overestimate um how much women talk, but they also underestimate how much they themselves talk.
Yeah.
So it's a double effect. Like, women literally get a double whammy of being of seeming like in business settings and whatnot, that saying that, being told that they talk too much, and also the guys underestimating how much they actually talk. So it's like you get double whammy. Yeah, the way that the best advice I have for other women in the Twitch space is like, just learn to fucking shove in,
Hmm.
and and you have to learn to elbow in. You don't have to be super mean, but you got to get your word in. I've even given panel hosts issues because I've been, God, there's been so many. I could talk all day about this, but like, it's it's bad, and it's pretty blatant if you go and I mean, obviously, you spend time in the debate space, you get a feel for it. But it's
I
pretty
feel like you
slanted.
and I could
Yeah,
complain about this for literally like 25 hours straight.
probably could. Yeah, I could tell 100 stories. I have like, I have as many stories as I've been on panels, pretty
Yeah.
much, with few exceptions. Yeah,
Yeah, we keep
but
doing it because it's
yeah.
it's it's like addictive. I don't know.
I
Um,
mean, the thing is, I'm gonna go to the panel even if everybody says that I'm a stupid piece of shit, screaming banshee bitch. Like, I don't care. I've gotten to that point where I'm
how did
like,
you
I'm
build up
here.
those calluses to be able to handle that shit?
Um, I don't know entirely. Like, I don't know. Like, part of it is just
It's a hard
practicing.
question.
Um, but the other part is just like, uh, okay, so like, there is a little bit of truth in like having fun with being like with being perceived as a villain. I don't love being perceived as the spiciest, most bad faith bitch on the internet, but if I'm gonna be called that anyway, may as well have a little bit of fun with it, right? So, I'll do some things that other people won't do. I'll be a little meaner than some other women are willing to be. I'll be a little more abrasive because they're gonna say that about me anyway. So I may as well just let myself have that license. That helps because you kind of know that you're like, yeah. But the other thing too, here's another thing. You want to hear one of the ways? Actually, I thought of one of the ways that I get
Hmm.
myself through it, which is, uh, this is totally megalomaniacal. So I understand if people are gonna take this and be like, "Wow, this is the most megalomaniacal," but femmes out there, keep this in mind. Think about Oprah, okay? Because Oprah was like, uh, "I'm gonna make a talk show for women on TV," and it was like, "Nah, it's not gonna happen. Women don't watch talk shows." Oprah's a fucking billionaire now.
Yeah.
Wanna know why? Because there's a fuckload of, and I know this for a fact, by the way. I can't give you all the data, but if there's ever a gut feeling that I would be willing to stake my life on, there are a fuckload of femme people out there who really wanna see femme people kick ass. And it's a totally untapped market because nobody, except for me and a few other people, are make is making that type of content. Is
Well, have
to
you seen? Sorry. Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Have you seen Gone Girl?
No, I don't think I have actually.
Okay, you should really see it. But
Okay.
the
On my master
main
media list.
the main character is a villain. Like, sorry, the main female character is a villain, and
Okay.
yet she's like worshipped just by women everywhere, even though she's like
Yeah.
this vile, terrible human being. Um, because she's like this personification of like female anger, you know?
Yeah.
And even though like everyone knows it's so toxic and stuff, it was just so cool to see like a real female villain on screen that had
Yeah.
like genuine reasons for being villainous, and there's just something fun about it, right? Even though
Yeah,
it's
and I
kind
mean,
of bad.
I do think Yeah, it is. But I mean, also, there's like this whole thing where, like, again, like, uh, the most evil that I could be imaginably is going to be nothing compared to what, like, fucking, like Keemstar exists. Like, this is a guy who just like bullies people for a living, and people are like, yeah, bro, yeah, he's so badass. It's just like, come on, like, you got it. There's a lot of room. It's
All
just,
the
the bar.
cancellations that have happened, I don't get why that has never happened of the shit
Oh,
that he
because
has done. And he's
yeah,
just still totally chill. I don't know. He's like uncancelable, I guess.
yeah. I mean, I joke about being uncancelable because I don't give a shit. But I mean, the reality is that, like, I've been subjected to an absolute deluge of harassment for
Hmm.
not for. I haven't even made it. I've just started pushing like over 200 like average viewers. Like, I'm not even like to that level like to any of the level. Like, again, it's so ridiculous. We did a again. I could scream about like misogyny and sexism in streaming spaces. We did a fucking exercise. I think there's one woman in the top 200 channels on Twitch at all. One,
Yep.
one. And yet you hear people screeching about fucking titty streamers and and the SJWification and the progressive of it. It's forcing women all over the place. One in the top 200. It's like, yeah, the double standard is fucking unbelievable. But yeah, just remember that as much as they screech and whine and will try to make your life hell, if you find a way to survive, there is a market for it. There's a fuckload of women out there who would love to have a stream that they could watch where they could see themselves to some degree in the content creator.
Yeah.
Because yeah, because in reality, a lot of uh it's not this idea that like femme people or women can't like uh can't enjoy male streamers. They absolutely can, of course. I'm not like, again, I'm not like some sort of gender essentialist, but like, let's be real. Like, there is a value in seeing somebody like you. Like, and a lot of people don't know that. This is something that gets me about when I have arguments about like people who are like, oh, like representation, like, isn't that like super not important? I'm like, no, like, you don't know what it's like to go your entire life never seeing anybody
Hmm.
who looks like you, who acts like you at all on any media ever. And that is what it's like for a lot of people. That's what
Yeah,
it's
because
like for
humans
trans
learn
people.
by reference. Like that's just a
Yeah.
human quality.
Yep. And
How do you
so it
deal
is
with
important.
that? How do you deal with that juxtaposition between, because I know that I can get really sensitive, like especially when
Yeah.
you're a member of a minority, like whatever
Mhm.
minority it is, and you're used to getting harassed for it and stuff. There's a tendency, and I think like this is a tendency just with anyone who is somewhat traumatized, right, to be
Mhm.
uncharitable, because like that the first instinct is if someone gives you criticism is it's because I'm a woman or it's because I'm Jewish or it's because of something like that.
Mhm.
Like how do you learn to separate that from the actual legitimate criticism and not just allow that to color all that criticism?
I think that one is just a lot of analysis and a lot of experience because like there are a lot of people who just are coming at you based on identity. There was again, there's a lot of people who will write comments on my posts that I'm just like, this is a double standard. I know which fandom you're coming from, and I know what you're saying to me. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, people who come in and they're like the fans of like a massive debate, bro, and they come in and they're like, oh, why are you so fucking argumentative? You're so fucking bad faith. You're always picking fights with people. I'm like, bro, your fucking person literally crashes panels all the time to go cause shit. Like, and you're gonna get mad at me? Like, nah. So you start to catch those and just not engage with them because you know that it's like not worth giving them your time.
Yeah.
Um, but another thing is like, unfortunately, you uh like you do have to learn a certain amount of like unfair patience. It's just true.
Hmm.
Which is like, and this is, I think that this is even more true for me being trans than, just being femme, and that's because like it's usually a little more explicit with being trans, and you have to like, and also it is the trans people are like the acceptable minority to hate these days. Like, lots and lots of people get away with hating trans people or feeling weird or saying weird things about trans people, and it's not quite to that level where people can like where it's like, if you're openly racist, like, you're gonna get fucking shut down really hard in
Hmm.
most
It's
cases.
still seen as
Um,
like a political stance, right?
yeah,
Rather than a
yeah,
moral stance. Yeah.
exactly. And so like yeah, people think that it's like, oh, you're being you're yeah, it's like, oh, well, I just have different political opinions. It's like, well, you're saying that I'm like illegitimate as a person, and that I'm like, you're implying heavily that anyway. So you have to learn to have a long fuse with these things. And the reason for that is that if you start to get the feeling like you're being you're experiencing a transphobia, um or whatever, you let them you let them bring their rope out and let them hang themselves with it a little bit, or at least let them give you the rope with which you can hang them. Because the problem is that with I don't believe in like complete self-censorship or assimilation or anything, because I left sales. I don't do that anymore. But will I endure a couple of free will I let them get a couple of free hits in so that it becomes apparent to the audience that I am holding back
Mhm.
while they're doing something shitty, then yeah, I will. Now, and I think that that's most apparent in my conversation, my debate that I had with Redneck. Some people will know this, some people will not, but this guy is a just raging, like, he doesn't acknowledge it at all, but he's a raging transphobe, and he got like he said like 3 or 4 just absolutely egregious things before I really went off on him. But when I did, the entire audience was on my side. And that's because by the time that we got to the third one, he'd used up even their willingness to recognize, that their willingness to let things slide that they didn't really realize are as painful to me as, less than it or I'm fucking up
Mhm.
my words, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, if they see that, they're like, a lot of random your average audience cis people, like, they they don't see the transphobia until it's been dropped in their face.
Yeah.
And I feel it because I know when somebody's making a fucking shitty comment. I know when somebody's being passive aggressive. But if I think that somebody's really bad, you give them their 1 or their 2 free passes, and then that's it. And then you whack, and you point it out. So
I want to ask you a random question that's just
sure.
like off the cuff. Um, I was talking with Alice, who's I think another trans woman you've spoken to before. Um, and she mentioned, I suggested that, like, to me, it seems when someone misgenders, like I say, a trans woman around you, that,
Huh?
that I feel like I should speak up and be the one to be like, no, those are her pronouns, right?
Mhm.
Because I feel like it's probably really stressful and anxiety provoking for the person that is trans to say that themselves. But Alice told me that's not always a good idea. So, like, what is the right situation? What is the right thing,
Uh,
I guess, for a cis person to do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's really super contextual. Like, because it can depend on the person that you're hanging out with or whatever. In general, like, I will defend myself. You know what I mean? Like, that's the way
Hmm.
that I tend to approach it, which is like, if somebody's like misgendering me like really bad, that or something, then I generally like to be able to be the one to be like, hey, can you fucking fix that, and not have anybody else do it for me. But if like but I think that changes sometimes for people who are um perhaps more shy, or perhaps if they're a lot earlier on in transition, they may not feel like they're allowed to at all, and sometimes that can help. You kind of got to read the situation. I will say though, it is helpful when cis people speak up when the trans person isn't around. And if
Hmm.
cis people are willing to speak up when seemingly no one is looking, in my opinion, that actually makes a lot of help, because it means that it starts to break down the idea that cis people can just turn off their politeness when they
Yeah.
think they're not around anybody who's so that's helpful. I think I would tend to agree with Alice in general on the first one, where it's like usually most trans people who are in those sorts of spaces are going to be able to bring it out, and they have a certain tolerance that they'll allow. Again, people fuck up pronouns all the time. I don't really freak out about it at all. Like, and I've gotten people going real bad on me. I've had whole chats just deliberately misgendering me just to try and piss me off. It doesn't work. Um but yeah, usually if there's something that's annoying me on a panel, which I have spoken up before, I prefer to usually have my own agency over that. But definitely, I would definitely say that like if you speak up for someone when they're not around and people are like misgendering or whatever, not only will that like help the audience like correct if they just had misconceptions, but also it shows like support when it shows support in a space like where otherwise there would have been none. So that's
Mhm.
like actually filling a vacuum, you know? I look at that as like being willing to like come down on like racist jokes when there's even if there's nobody around who would like be the victim of that because it stopped them propagating where you know a lot of times prejudice exists in these like cracks where they think nobody's looking. It's the mask wearing thing. They put on their
Yeah,
mask and
exactly.
then when everybody's around they look every other way and they go and then you make my jokes and it's just like coming down on that pushes those people like it pushes that behavior further into inappropriateness. So I do think that's very helpful.
So I've heard that
Personally.
you've said that you're non-binary as well as a trans
Mhm,
woman, right?
mhm.
And so a lot of people would probably find that confusing, I guess, who are not familiar with that kind of terminology. So,
Yeah.
what does that mean, like in your case?
Yeah, I can explain. Actually, I can explain my thought process.
Yeah, would that would
To
be
be
amazing.
completely honest. Yeah. So I started uh identifying as a non-binary trans woman after before I started streaming, like about 2 years ago, and it was it was after a lot of thinking, because for a long time I considered myself a binary trans woman that I was gonna and like I was like, yeah, I just want to be known as a woman, and I still use she her pronouns. And I tend to, I like it when I'm referred to as a woman. But I also realized that like I don't like the idea of being essentialized to that, or being stuck on this idea of a binary. Like I think there's a it's very weird, and it's kind of hard, and I understand why this would be confusing to a lot of people and whatnot, but at the same time, there is certain expectations that are still placed on you, even when you're like when you're willing to tackle gender and transition and like there's this thing that people have talked about. You might have heard the term like butch phobia,
Hmm.
which is like some people like again, it's not talked about pretty heavily, but it
It's
is
like you
something that
can't be a
exists. And
butch trans woman, right?
yeah,
Like that's
oh,
the attitude. Yeah.
it is that is a very, very strong attitude in my opinion that is
Hmm.
all over the place. And there was this point in time where I realized like, I had I had a one of my gender confirming surgeries a couple years ago, an orchiectomy. I'm very open about that. And that was very good for me. I don't really feel like I want any further bottom surgery or anything. Um, and I'm, at this point, I've known I was trans for 10 years. I've been solid on hormones consistently for 6 years. And it's like, um, there was this thing where I realized like, no, like really, I identify strongly with femininity and I like being seen that way. That is who I am. But at the same time, I acknowledge that like there are still people who don't see me that way, and there are still people who want to put me in a box and who will judge me as supposedly less than because I'm trying to claim this. And there's also a part of me that recognizes that at the end of the day, there isn't a gender binary.
Hmm.
And as much as I like femininity, I would like that to be a characteristic or an aesthetic someday, as opposed to this box that you have to climb into, that you have to do all of these certain hoops to jump into. I think that anybody should be able to embrace that with or without transition as they see fit. And so I came to this realization that like, wait a second, like I don't really believe in this binary. And I uh, so the and it just fit better for me to say, no, I'm a non-binary trans woman. Like I do gravitate very strongly towards certain feminine things, but sometimes I want to do things that are not associated with that. And I don't want anybody to feel like to have weird expectations on me. So it made sense to me to identify as a non-binary trans woman. And oftentimes people will just ask me just because they've never encountered it before, and then it leads to me being able to explain, you know what I mean, why I feel that way and what I think about gender as a whole and why I fear like
Yeah.
being put into a box. And there are times where uh I like to express differently than like what you would expect a binary person to express like. I have a costume in the works that's pretty work it's going to be pretty mask leaning, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But I don't want like I feel like I should be free to do that. You know what I mean? I feel
I
like I
wonder
should
like
be
how
free to do
many
that as a trans
women
person too.
I wonder how
Yeah.
many women, like both cis women and trans women, like have felt during this whole pandemic of working from home, of like starting to just break down all these habits that we've built up, that we assumed that we just absolutely like naturally adored. I mean, I just for me, things like wearing heels and makeup and all these, stereotypical feminine things, like how many of those things I've started to feel like, oh, that I don't think I really was doing that for me because I'm not doing it now. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and my feet feel so much better. And all these, and my skin's so much better, and all these things. And like, and then on top of that, trans women are questioned, all are always having like their femaleness questioned. So there's that added pressure of trying to be female enough to be accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's there's a I've had the discussion about makeup, like one of the most what a great conversation I had on the Prime's Amazon Lily podcast. It was a couple of months ago, and we
Mm-hmm.
had a conversation about just this and about how I did used to wear so I used to wear makeup when I was in sales. I wore makeup every single day, and um and it was definitely out of fear, because I felt like I didn't pass when I didn't wear makeup, when I didn't like I had to do a lot of makeup. Like I had to do
Mm-hmm.
like a lot. And and then, I, started to like makeup in some ways and I still do to a certain degree. But there was this point in early streaming where I was doing makeup every stream and I realized that I was starting to stress out about it and I wasn't enjoying it. And so I stopped. And I don't wear makeup now. And there are some times where I still feel like a little weird about that because I'm like, oh, people like, do people think I'm gross or whatever? But there's also a part of me that feels very free because I like wearing makeup when I want to wear it, not when I feel like I have to because other people want me to.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some I look back at times where I'm most proud of my makeup, and they were times where I chose to like do a fucking awesome look, and that was for me. And that is like so much of a better feeling than feeling pressured into it or feared into it. And I do think that like I personally, I think there's going to be a lot of societal rethinking of certain things because of partially and thanks to the pandemic. A lot of people are spending a lot of time thinking on their own and challenging these things. And for people who didn't know it already, like there is a lot of coercive beauty standards that women are held to.
Yeah.
Um, it's ridiculous, and a lot of women don't like they grow so strong, you know what I mean? Like carrying them all the time that they don't even feel them. That you might even ask
Mm-hmm.
some women out on the street, be like, "Oh, do you feel like you're pressured into wearing makeup?" It's like, "Nah, not really. I just put my makeup on every
That
day.
is
It's not a
such a
big
good
deal."
analogy, like as if it's like a weight that you're carrying and you just stop noticing. Yep.
It kind of is though in a
Yep.
lot of cases. I mean, when I was in sales, again, I not only did I always wear makeup because partial, that was like it's a double-bladed sword because it's like I want to pass as a woman, but I also want to look good as a woman and fit in with all the other women who are also wearing fuckloads of makeup at my job because they
Mm-hmm.
have to. Nobody in sales, no woman in sales ever doesn't wear makeup. It's just not a thing that happens. But I also had to wear a very, very femme out, uniform. Not uniform, it's an outfit, but you have only a few options you can choose because they're trying to keep their branding consistent. And for women, it's a skirt, or the most ugliest, uncomfortable pants that you could possibly do, uh, and that you could possibly wear, and a little like green ascot that you have to wear. And uh, I thought I looked good at times, but I also realized that like, wow, like I don't really have a whole lot of options here. I kind of got to wear this skirt always. And like I don't really that's not really my style. I'm way more like I've come to find out that my style is way more like soft butch. Like I like wearing like tank tops and and fucking jeans or like plaid shit and like, ripped up fucking pants that I've gone camping in and whatever. Like that's way more my style, and I'm way more comfortable and at home with that. And like it is a weight. It is a weight. It's like you don't always see it as a weight, but and I think a lot of people just they grow so used to it that you don't see that it's like something that you're doing somewhat coercively that you don't actually have that much of a say in. And I think it's freeing to be able to step out of that.
I actually think you're
And I,
so brave, like to do that. Yeah, because I know like the added pressure of being trans and everything can make you want to just fit this typical box of femininity in order to tell people that you're valid, which is
yeah.
such a sad thing. And I don't know, I think it's super cool.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I mean, I'm much happier for it at the end of the day. Now, I recognize there's that in some ways there are factors and what's the word, circumstances of my life that allow me I mean, I'm a streamer. I stay in my house most of the time. but like
Same.
uh eh, but like wouldn't it be cool if everyone could have if we could live in a society where everyone can have that sort of agency over their own appearance and their styles? And also, I bet people would come up with some fucking really cool looking styles that haven't even been explored yet because we just are so weird about it here.
Yeah, we're
Specifically
so
with women.
caged in.
Yeah. We're so caged in, yeah, and femininity is like this weird it is like the prickly zone especially in America. Like men are not men are not allowed to approach femininity at all. Makeup is not acceptable for men. Like
In some ways, men are even more in a box, at least visually, right? With how
yeah.
they can present.
Oh yeah. In fact, I talked about this the other night about how I do think that like visually, like when it comes to like style, like dress style and whatnot, men are more trapped
Mhm.
than women are because it for a man to like reach in and grab something that's traditionally seen as feminine, um it is like you are becoming gay. It's like the way our society looks at it. And it's like you are less of a man for doing that. Whereas, stylistically, um some people are like particularly religious people are very weird about women like wearing pants and wearing men's
Mhm.
clothes, quote unquote, but most people are kind of like, yeah, good for her, she's a go-getter or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, so because you're becoming more like a guy, or more masculine, like, oh, you'll still get called a dyke because, sorry, I didn't mean to drop a slur, but you'll still get called that, you know what I mean, by people. But you'll also there's a little bit of respect that you get for being like, ah, yes, look at you're going to your job and whatever. Yeah, and then but I will say that when it comes to things like career, when it comes to things like field of study, when it comes to things like role, like in the family, women are totally caged in. And it is ridiculous to the degree that happens. And it's like I think that a lot of guys can't even understand that at all.
You
Like
brought up
that like
the homophobia. You brought up like the gay thing a bit,
yeah.
and I wonder like how much do you think transphobia is actually in part caused by an underlying homophobia, right? Especially when it comes to trans
Yeah.
women.
I mean, I think there's a lot. I think a lot of it is it smears together because our society again doesn't have the words for most of these things. So like a lot of
Hmm.
people live their lives until very recently when like a lot of trans stuff has been pushed to the public eye. Um like people just kind of assumed that trans people didn't really exist, and in fact this was even baked into some of the original diet, like really problematic and fucked up diet ways that they diagnose trans people, that like which is the whole like Blanchard's dichotomy and all that shit. Very very fucked up. It's pseudoscientific bullshit that somehow made its way into clinics and stuff. But yeah, there is definitely it definitely smears together because people don't, especially in America and I guess North America. I imagine this is the case somewhat in Canada as well. There's not really like a they don't really separate sex and gender, and so as a result, it's like, oh well, why would you do feminine things? Well, it's because you want to like bang a guy. Like, oh, you're gay. Like,
Hmm.
it's so fucking weird. And so yes, I do think that there is a lot of that. I don't even, but I think the bigger thing that I would focus on is that it's often just disgust. It's not even necessarily, you don't even need to call it homophobia or transphobia. It's just this sort of ingrained disgust that people have.
It's such a sad
And
word, right? Like, I
it
know
is
why you're
sad.
using it, but yeah, it's such an intense word. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And it is what it is. I mean, like I have letters in my closet that I've kept for to remember, like that were written to me by family members, and that is the only way to describe them. It's just they are disgusted at the idea that I might be trans. They are disgusted at the idea that I might not be, the type of child that they thought I was, that they wanted me to be, and it is a deeply rooted disgust. And um, this is something that you see. If we get really deep into like talking about trans issues, you start to see this even being replicated in things like in like porn and stuff, that
Hmm.
there is a it's really fucked if you look into like a lot of like, and thankfully it's starting to change a little bit because people are challenging this, but for a long time there was an implicit uh humiliation that is tied to like most trans like scenes that are written for trans people, specifically trans women in porn, that
Yeah.
like it's supposed there's like it's inherent to the scenes. It's like you're being humiliated and it's disgusting and that's getting you off. And it was like tied together. It's so fucked. It's so fucked and it's so
It's so
subtle.
upsetting too because so many trans people are also dealing with gender dysphoria, right?
Hmm.
So they're dealing with their own sense of that word. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, they have to deal with it from the rest of the world. It's just
Yeah.
so fucking cruel.
It is. And I will say that like that is probably my I don't want to say primary, but it's one of my one of my biggest motivations in all of this that I do, which is that I really, really would, by the time I die, whenever that happens, I really hope that the world is a better place for trans people, because it's fucking horrible right now. And uh and it makes me sad. And I had this, I don't know. There's been this thing that's been in my mind, and maybe it's a new fire for me or something like that that's burning. But it's just like, uh, I'm so tired of all the trans people that I know in my life suffering. I'm so fucking tired of it. I'm so fucking tired of them being
Mhm.
disrespected. I'm so tired of them not being able to pay their bills because they get passed over for things at work, or they don't get jobs at all. And everyone tells them it's something they're doing wrong, when it's just like, no, it's just really weird that they have all these credentials, they did all this good shit, they're really fucking good at what they do, and they just don't get the jobs. They just don't get the raises. I am so motherfucking tired of it. I'm so tired of thinking about all the trans people I know and going, okay, here's everybody who's really hurting. And that's why you'll hear me say, people will sometimes come on and say, trans rights. And I always reply, pointing at the camera, and trans thriving. And the reason why is because I think we need to go beyond trans rights. We need to go to a place where trans people can thrive, because uh I I don't want, like, trans people are amazing, and there's been so many fucking incredible influential trans people that nobody even knows about or doesn't know that they're trans. And it just gets brushed under the rug and forgotten. And it's like, no, like people like me have done a lot of really cool things, and we get villainized in public media all the time, and I'm tired of that. And I hope that, I don't know. I don't know that I'll be able to do anything. I'm just a fucking
You
streamer
know,
at the end of the day.
I wonder,
But
like,
I hope
sorry
so.
to tie it back, but I wonder if this is particularly, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but why the whole situation with RGR was so painful for both of you, right?
Yeah.
That it's like there's so much at stake here. And you both probably really know this. You know this in your own lives, you know this in the people around you. And it's just there's gonna naturally be friction on how to deal with this, right? And the best
Yeah.
ways to go about it.
Real quick, do you mind if I hit the restroom real quick before I answer this question? Because I think I have a lot of stuff I want to say, but
Yes,
I want to
yes,
use the
100%.
restroom. All right, I'll be right back. Chat, ask questions or whatever.
I'll try to look at your chat so I can answer both, but your chat's way busier than mine. So it's a little overwhelming. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how people can see that chat. That's crazy. By the way, if you guys are, I'll plug myself a little. If you want to hear more of like these talks. I don't know. I love connecting with people and talking about, I don't know, the really deeper stuff. So if you are interested in more of that content, you should definitely sub to me on Twitch. It's Aristocracy TV. And you should follow me on Twitter, which is also Aristocracy TV. Though my Twitter is a little less wholesome. It's I can get yeah, I can get mad sometimes there. I'm not gonna lie. Do you think there should be some women that come out and say, "I just got my account agreed now"? Wait, is my chat just debating like 2012 feminism? Is that what's going on? Yes, I got baited. Story of my life. Everyone's Twitter's no Twitter brings out it's like the game Rust. I don't know if you've ever played that. It just brings out the worst in your character. But it's also like why it's fun. It's terrible. When you said no question is off the table, did you mean to make this seem like a hardball interview? No, 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 that's not what I meant. I just meant that we were gonna get into really personal stuff. I was supposed to do a content warning beforehand, but luckily we didn't really get into anything that was too crazy. But yeah, I didn't mean that it was a hardball interview. That's just like not my style. The thing is, Demon Mama gets all the people that I bring on are constantly in these debates regularly, so they're constantly dealing with hardball interviews. So I don't particularly feel the need to be hypercritical. Demon Mama gets that all the time, and you can look up videos of that shit, right? I don't know. For me, I want to just highlight the people behind these political opinions, the people who are actually debating and what, makes us so passionate and everything.
Back.
Oh, welcome back.
Sorry about that. My
It's okay.
partner got me a cookie as well, which is nice. Um, so
I want a cookie. The heck?
yeah, it was good. It's peanut butter cookie. I'm like, hell yeah. So yeah, the RGR situation, high stakes, and being a big personal issue. Absolutely, 100%. And I know it was for me. I know it was for her. I don't agree with the way that she decided to go about the things, especially after the debate, but I understand why it got spicy. And for the record, like I I was totally willing to, after the first day, like whatever, I would have had another, private conversation, anything. Like I was pretty willing to do a lot of different things. Um, but um, I just don't I don't know that that was mutual, but as far as the first conversation, I absolutely understand like why both of us got heated, and I realized that like there were things I said that I like shouldn't have, and I really should have ended it because that probably would have saved us both a lot of pain. And I know that she is, very very serious about the things that she wants to do and the things that she fights for. Um, and I don't even know that like we had a really minor disagreement as far as the bigger picture is concerned. Like our prescriptions at the end of the day are more or less the same. We had a small philosophical disagreement. Um and
Yeah,
yeah,
you're both
and it's
fighting
far
at the end of the day. You're both fighting for trans lives, right? And that
absolutely.
should matter
Yeah.
more than anything else.
Yeah. And I wish that it would have been resolvable. It doesn't seem like it was. And again, most of that was because of the aftermath, the way the aftermath was handled. Um but I don't know there's anything I can do about that. I mean, I literally can't. At least, from my end, I've been blocked all over the place. Nothing I could even do even if I wanted to. And
Oh, so you guys
there,
haven't spoken or anything since then?
nope. Nope. Even though I mean, I've expressed that I would be open to such a thing, but I don't think that I don't think that it's in the cards. And again, there are a lot of things that transpired after the initial debate that I feel are um indicative of malintent, that perhaps wasn't that I don't think was present in the original conversation, but that came out afterwards. For example, like literally, it wasn't just fans of people that were alleging that I was a transphobe. It was Riley herself, which I think is a completely ridiculous and uncharitable claim. I never claimed anything like that about her. I disagreed with certain parts of her argument, but I don't think that that made her a bad representative for trans people or a transphobe. But that is not that. level of like uh approach has not been mutual. So unfortunately, I just don't think it's in the cards. Maybe, but
Maybe she
there
just
would
needs
have
some
to
time, right? Um,
maybe, but I
yeah.
mean at the same time, like, and this is one area where I will like I do tend to want to set the record straight because after, and a lot of people don't know this, but after the original debate, again, I ceasefired. Like I was like, I sat down with my mod team. We were like, we're gonna make sure that none of this, like that there's no fucking harassment, that there's nothing, we're gonna come down really hard on it. We're not posting the VOD, we're not gonna cut the VOD into a video. We were like, we're not posting this shit anywhere. This was a really super personal fight, and it was really messy for both of us, and we didn't really go anywhere. It just kind of hurt everyone's feelings. And literally the next day, um, there were, well, from starting on Tuesday and going forward after the debate, Riley did multiple streams about me, with a bunch of people who disliked me, said a whole bunch of what I believe to be genuinely abhorrent things about me while being encouraged by a massive platform, and has proceeded to continue to fan the flames of those things. Also looked aside when people who she was talking with and platforming and communicating with were repeating things like whether I was a transphobe or not. Someone literally asked her on her stream, "Do you think Demon Mama is a transphobe?" I have the clip of her literally being like, yeah, I think Demon Mama's a transphobe." And she like yeah, like people in my chat are like, I mean, she banned people who were just for being members of my community, like a real like bridge burning moment. And this continued until I made my response, which I had hoped like I wouldn't have to do at all, but I obviously needed to address it to some degree. That response was bombarded with harassment, which none of which was
I'm sure
ever
that was
like
really hurtful to you too, right? Because
yeah,
you've had to deal with so much transphobia and like that it's so hurtful for me. Like people often when they find out that I was born in Israel, they think, oh, she must be a Zionist, then she must be a Nazi. Like that's like a
yeah.
lot of that's common shit I get from the left, and there is like nothing that's more hurtful than being grouped with the people who've oppressed you.
Well, and the other thing too is that a lot of these, I mean, again, the allegations are just so ridiculous. Like the idea that I'm transphobic wasn't even based on my argument. It was a complete mischaracterization of a single line that I said. And people literally, I was arguing just out of curiosity. Sometimes I like to push back with some people who have particularly egregious claims. And I asked them to they quoted back to me what they think I said, and then I showed them the actual clip, and I'm like, "Do you realize that you were literally misquoting me? You put quotes around it, but you literally misquoted me in a way that made it favorable to your image and your argument. And that is not what I was saying, and nobody even tried. And it was this idea that like I was apparently invalidating her transness by saying like I feel like this conversation has become like about justifying the existence as a trans person. Like I don't feel like anybody has to do that. I feel like everyone's valid regardless. Like we don't have to argue to prove that we're good enough or that we deserve rights. We deserve rights by the fact that we're human and we exist.
That's why it was
And
such a sensitive topic. And even though as people in my chat are saying that the exchange was bad for the trans community, and I can totally see that. But on the other side, um, I do think that there was like an added benefit of seeing the diversity in the trans
yeah,
community, and seeing the diversity of opinion, and that you all are not like just one monolith group, and you are thinkers and thinking about the ideology behind it too. And I don't know. I feel like there was also a benefit to that. So maybe that's the silver lining, even though I know it was super
well,
tough
it's
for
funny
you.
too that people say that like people will say like this whole thing was bad to the trans community, and to be fair, just by sheer numbers, like by a long shot, most of that is directed at me, not at RGR. And and I think that's very unfair because there's two things to think about that. One, I do think that it was a really messy conversation, but I didn't publish the video. RGR went forward with that, even
Hmm.
though there was our emissaries and everything. Everybody who we had set up, that structure that we had set up for partnership, we were like even separate from me. Everyone was there was unanimity across her mod team and my mod team that we shouldn't post this. We shouldn't make this into some sort of drama farm. We should just unlist the VOD, let it die as a personal disagreement, and not let it become some giant political issue that a bunch of people went on to. But RGR launched the video immediately afterwards, immediately went on to a bunch of other people's shows to talk up to shit to talk shit about me. Like, I get that maybe some people might think that like it was bad for the trans community. Well, I did my best. That was not me. And RGR was the one who put that debate in front of hundreds of thousands of people. So if that was bad for the trans community, you should take that to RGR. Not really. Don't do that. It's fucking a month ago, but you know what I mean.
Well, speaking of,
That's yeah.
um, have so we both know you're probably going to deal with tons of transphobia on the right.
Mhm.
But what about the left? Like, do you, what kind of transphobia, have you dealt with from them?
Um, so it depends on how broadly you define the left, right? Like,
Yeah,
I would say that there are a
I'll
lot
say
of
very broad.
yeah, okay, if we're gonna go really broad and say like the general American left, there are a lot of transphobic liberals. I'll just be completely honest about that.
Mhm.
There are a lot of transphobic liberals, and they are often sometimes well, I don't know, they pull some of the same stuff where they refuse to acknowledge that they're doing it or care, and then they just dunk on you. I mean, like, again, like, when I've crossed multiple, like, heavily liberal communities, there I've gotten deluges of transphobia, and it's often weirdly intellectualized in like a way that the right doesn't, where the right is just like it's against nature, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. But on the lib left, it's more like it'll be more like, no, this person is the wrong type of trans person and they're doing harm to trans people by not
Mhm.
doing what I want them to do, which I think is both condescending, it's smug, condescending, and transphobic.
And
And
they'll highlight certain trans people as like one of the good ones, you know?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That absolutely happens. And another thing that can happen is there is this very subtle form of transphobia on the left that I think is incredibly dangerous and bad. Which is that okay, so there's two parts of this. The first one is like a there is a in my opinion transphobic rooted expectation placed on all trans people that they be perfect before they're allowed before they step into the public eye and forever after they step in the public eye. You're not allowed to make a mistake because you haven't just made a mistake or you haven't fucked up or you haven't
I
just in
100%
somebody
agree with
else.
you here. Like, I
Yes,
wish people
and
talked about that more.
well, I try to. I've done a couple of streams on this, but a lot of people don't because a lot of times it just gets you for more people mad at you. But this happens with I think the best example is of course ContraPoints, like of somebody who has grown to a decent level of fame. I think that people don't even have perspective on her fame. She's probably like the most famous trans person online. But she's not even close in fame to a lot of celebrities.
I
But
love her.
regardless of that, yeah, I love ContraPoints too. I literally like when I was like she started making videos before she even knew she was trans, and I was watching them when I was just coming out as when I was just going full time as trans. So it was really really fucking
Well, she helped
important.
change my mind on so many things. I
Yeah.
grew up as like a huge Harry Potter fan, loving
Mhm,
J.K. Rowling. And I remember watching, and I remember like seeing the criticism of J.K. Rowling, and I just didn't understand it.
mhm.
And when I watched her video, because her video is really, it's not for people who already agree with her. It's really
Right.
for people, it's really to change people's minds. And,
Mhm.
um, and it's just like the way because she never strawmans the opposing argument. She just
Yeah.
demonstrates why it's false in a very like honest way, and that's how you change someone's mind.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I think ContraPoints is particularly good at that, and I think that a lot of people don't give her the credit that she deserves for how well she's able to convince people like convince people who aren't necessarily far right or anything like that, but people who are like perhaps in the liberal area or the slightly conservative area into reconsidering certain positions. I think she's very very good at that.
especially turfs. I think she has changed a lot of turf minds, right? I've always
I
said
hope
that
so.
there's like, yeah, there's two types of turfs, like in my opinion. You could disagree, right? There's
Yeah.
like the type of turf that isn't really even a radical feminist, right? They're just like
Hmm.
a transphobe and they're a female.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they join the turf groups, right? And then they call
Yep.
themselves gender critical. But and then there's the other type, which I see as more like a radical feminist that is traumatized by their experiences,
Yeah.
and they are just, you know, ignorant, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad person, but they're just ignorant of those views. And
Yeah.
those people, 100%, I've seen she like her change those people's minds.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
so
you're broadly right. I would argue there's probably a third type of turf. Um, but yeah.
that's a
Uh,
radical feminist and a transphobe.
I think there's like the third type of turf is a deeply self-hating. Um, these people populate the gender critical subreddits heavily. They're
Mm-hmm.
deeply self-hating uh trans men who are either like not they're refusing that they're a trans man, or they detransitioned because it was really hard for them for whatever reason, and they've turned it into
Mm-hmm.
like making it it's it's huge. There's a
Like a
lot of people
political
like
movement.
yeah, it's like, well, I mean, it's just like it's tempting, right? Because I mean, I know that there were a lot of there was a this is going to be really weird and really into the nitty gritty of like inter-community politics, but I mean, for a long time there was like a sect or a faction of trans women online who were super all about like, I mean, now we call them trans medicalists, but they didn't really have a name before, and these were trans people who were very much they were super apologetic for the medical approach. There were right types of trans people and wrong types of trans people,
Mm-hmm.
and there I think that turfism and gender critical quote unquote is like that, but for trans men, where if you are having issues with gender and but you can't quite get there because society fucking sucks, but acknowledging that society sucks is a really hard thing to acknowledge. So instead you can kind of just be like, no, it's the trans identity, it's the trans you know, there's all these like weird bad trans people that are like doing all this stuff, the political trans people, the trans I have a problem with the gender ideology, and you'll hear that a lot in these spaces
Mm-hmm.
that they talk about, I don't have a problem with trans people, I have a problem with trans ideology. And there's a lot of those people who are themselves trans, but deeply self-hating and deeply in denial. And I do believe that there's a lot of people like that out there. I would say that's like the third type. Um,
Is there a part
but
of you that wants to be compassionate to those people because they're dealing with those self hate issues?
yeah, for sure. Like, uh, and to varying degrees, there are certain people that I am less willing to grant like that emotional space to, but for sure. Um, like Blair White, it's I think it's almost impossible for a trans person to look at Blair White and not feel at least a little sad.
Mm-hmm.
Because and maybe that's super judgmental, but I don't really care. Like she's been really horrible to other people, like really bad. Like I don't think this is even close to how mean she is to other people, but it does make me sad because it's like, I mean, there were all when I was super baby trans, like there was a lot of stuff, there were a lot of bad ideas I had, like, oh fuck. I mean, I literally, and I've talked about this on stream before, there was a point where I threw my hormones away because I was suffering so much the
Yeah.
repercussions of trying to transition that I had this moment where I just broke and I was like, I can't do this. Like I've got to be wrong. I have to be wrong. Everyone is telling me I'm wrong. I have to be wrong. And it was horrible. It was agonizing. And it took me finally reaching a point where like I basically gave myself like exposure therapy to extremely the most like transphobic transmedicalist positions that I could possibly imagine, and I just said no, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Is any of this actually legitimate? What's going on? It was really super painful for me to go through and learn all these things and then go, but at the end I was like, I don't have to hate myself anymore because these people are full of shit. But I had to
Yeah.
put myself through to get there, and there was so much self-hate. Like, the that part definitely had ties into my religious upbringing because you learn to think about the world in terms of guilt. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, I felt so guilty, and I felt like I was not trans enough, and that there was always this worry that I'm like, oh, am I deluded? Am I like whatever? And yeah, so the short the to get the answer to the question, yes, I do feel bad for a lot of people. I I can sympathize and empathize very much with the feelings of self-hate.
I
And
when I
yeah,
saw that debate that she did recently with those conservatives, and I like the level of I hadn't seen like that kind of level of transphobia in a while that she
yeah,
had to deal with. And yeah, I guess I was in a bit of a bubble. And when I
yeah,
was watching it, I know she says like she's done bad things to people and stuff, but like, oh my god, it almost made me tear up. Like just like
yeah,
watching the shit, especially like everyone was raging at her for not defending herself, and I just remembered all the times that I haven't defended myself like against in those environments, especially when you're in a minority and you're trying to find acceptance, and it's so easy to just fall into this habit of trying to conform at least to something just as a
mhm.
survival mechanism, right? Like,
Yeah, for
I mean, I,
sure.
I
Yeah,
couldn't think of how many times I've done things like I'm a quarter Asian, so like I used to have this huge insecurity about my eye size, and
yeah,
the way my eyes were. So I once taped my eyes every single day, in order to change the like make my eyelids more like European.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and like I don't know, there's just so many moments like that, and I feel like she probably gets so defensive because of how she gets treated by the left, but I just couldn't help but just feel some compassion for like the fact that she was in that situation and how much pain that probably.
Yeah, I mean, it is
Yeah.
tragic, and that is the thing. It is tragic because, um, it's it is one of those things where it's like, reaping what you sow. Like, I remember my first encounter with Blair White, online. This was before I was a streamer. This was before I was even interested. I mean, I've always been interested in politics, but I didn't really follow online politics trends. But there was this
Mm,
one trans woman that I followed, who wrote a lot of papers. Like, she's a scientist. She wrote a lot of papers like about trans stuff to try and help people understand it better and whatever. And Blair was like fighting with this person. And I remember seeing this Blair White person and going like, what the fuck? And then I scrolled their timeline and I saw her using like transphobic slurs, against this other person who I really liked. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was just like, holy shit. And it's like, oh, she's been dishing this shit out for a long time. And like, it's catching up. She has succeeded at helping to build the world that will reject her. And that is very sad to think about. Um, and it's almost like, it's almost impossible to separate the anger from the sadness, because it's like I'm so fucking pissed that Blair White has spent years, cultivating a massive audience, churning out stuff that I have to now fight every single day, that all other trans people have to deal with every single day. But at the same time, it's also like she built her own trap, like she built her own death pit. And it's like, oh my god, that's just so it is sad. It is sad, but at the same time, I'm also like, I recently did a really spicy TikTok about Blair White, and I was like, Blair White helped build the world that makes so many of my trans siblings homeless, and she's going to be with us soon, you know? Like, it's very obvious by that interview that the right is moving a direction in which she is no longer relevant. She is no longer needed for what they want. And it is very sad. I don't know if she'll ever realize it. I don't know if she's capable of it. I don't know if she's too far in. But it does make me sad. It makes me sad that like it makes me sad that that's the state of the world. That like somehow we've found ourselves in a world where for many people, that sort of defensive hate and that sort of deference to cis people just because they're cis and just because they're the dominant members of society is is like a quote unquote viable option for survival. And it's very sad. Yeah.
well, it just reminds me of like how much Jewish culture and Jewish history is being lost with Jews focusing so much on trying to be these like model minorities,
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
and trying to fit in with, I guess, like non-Jewish society. Um, and yeah, it's a hard question because like what happens if, I guess, capitulating in some ways and being more pragmatic does lead to, say, like more medical treatment for trans people and like
Yeah.
laws or something, but at the same time it's still perpetuating problems. Like
Yeah.
I often feel like there's just not a right way, a completely right way to go about this.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's really super interesting that you touch on this again because again, it's one of those parallels that I think there are like striking parallels between the experience of specifically in America, Jewish people and trans people. In that like there is a sort of cycle of discussing assimilationism, and in fact, it's been talked about a lot in trans circles recently. The
Mm,
idea of like, well, okay, like, do we really get meaningful wins when we fight for like this sort of assimilationist approach where you clean up and you look super good like everybody expects, and then you get like, some people will point to things like gay marriage, and it's like, well, gay marriage is like super happy to have that, but it wasn't exactly what people were actually fighting about, you know? It's great and it's super good, but like the fight for gay rights in America, like, was mostly about being fucking decimated by AIDS and having the federal government literally cover up and lead to like deliberately hide information about it, which led to so many gay people dying and it's destroyed. Oh God, like it's hard sometimes to even talk about how the trans and gay communities have been destroyed by AIDS. And I mean, when you mention things like
yeah.
losing bits of history, it's literal.
No,
Fuck.
I
I
had
have
a gay man told me once that you don't understand. Okay, during the 80s, we experienced a Holocaust, right?
yes,
Like there was entire communities, friend groups, like where it's like they're just gone, wiped out.
gone. Yep. Yeah. And there's this there's a friend of mine who I'll keep anonymous who is an older gay man, and we have had these incredible conversations because he gets it. He gets the pain. When I say like I'm tired of my friends suffering, like, it's like he gets it, and I can see and I can feel that he gets it. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of gay men who lived through the AIDS crisis who are alone now. Totally alone. None of the people that they knew who was their friends group, who they survived with, who they shared laughter with are alive
Mm.
anymore. And yeah, now we have stuff that can help you live with it, but it's so little so late. And a lot of trans people traditionally are one of the highest, still to this day, are one of the highest groups afflicted with HIV for a lot of reasons.
It's
And
interesting. People never talk about that, right? When it comes
no one
to
talks about
trans
it.
issues.
And believe it or not, here's another thing that a lot of people don't know. This is a random little factoid, another parallel. The Have you ever? I'm sure you have. I'm sure you're familiar with this. I'm sure you've seen the picture of the like in from Germany of the children throwing books into the fire, right?
Hmm.
That famous picture of the Hitler Youth
Yeah.
throwing the books into the fire. Many of those books were books from Magnus Hirschfield's Institute for Sexual Studies, is that the English name for it, which was the only at that time like trans research school. They had made so much progress. There were people in Germany, there were trans people in Germany transitioning and receiving HRT, as far as we can tell, at that time. And
Wow.
the school was burnt to the ground. Everything was burnt. And Magnus Hirschfeld had to flee Germany. And he was Jewish. And like there was like and we lost a half of a century of history. We don't even know, like, the HRT didn't even properly pick back up until almost the 70s. So there's like 50 years of lost science and lost history of trans people like directly caused by the same things that led to the loss of Jewish history. And it's so fucked. It's just so fucked. And I always recommend people to go take a look at the documentary Paris is Burning,
Mm.
because Paris is Burning is a look into a world that most people never saw. The world of queer people in the 90s and the 80s that nobody ever saw because they just didn't know it existed. And a lot of those people, like it fucking broke my heart because I got to the end of the video, the end of the movie, and I looked it up on Wikipedia, and almost every single person in that movie is dead.
Yeah.
And the movie was shot in the 90s. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, all of these people who were in this movie are gone. You can't even get their stories anymore. They're gone. They're dead. And it's just like, okay, like, yeah, the magnitude hits you, and
It's
it's
why
shocking.
recording
Yeah.
history is so insanely important, right? And it's like
Yep.
I right now, like the work that I'm doing is I'm trying to do research on war crimes that happened to the Palestinians in the 1948 war. And luckily a lot of them are still alive, but they're not going to be
Yeah.
alive for long. Um
Yeah.
and they're just like, I don't know. I I'm obviously biased as this, as someone who's, dedicated my life to history, but I just think
Yeah.
like maybe a lot of the answer to the issues that we've talked about is teaching people those stories, right? At least because, we've lost a lot of them, but as you mentioned, there are some that we do know. And I wonder if teaching people that stuff and teaching people about like the history associated with that, because I didn't even know that, what
Yeah.
you just mentioned um uh about like those that center that got destroyed. So
Yeah, it's super.
yeah.
If you look up a Magnus Hirschfeld on Wikipedia, it's a hell of a rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, it was like uh, again, there was in Germany, there was solidarity between Jewish people and queer people, and again, it's I don't think it's like a coincidence that the first person to meaningfully and humanely and lovingly, compassionately seek to try to help trans people live a better life was a Jewish man in Germany. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
there's that's not an accident of history. There's an understanding of what that sort of alienation from society can do and can cause. It's just it's wild, and it is something that I bring up frequently on my stream because a lot of people don't know about it. I didn't. I mean, I remember when I learned about that, and I was like, no, I've never even learned. I've seen the photo, and I never
You
even
know
knew what
what?
books were being burned.
This makes me want to do, right? Because I hadn't even thought about it from that perspective. And I of all people, should have. And this makes me want to do like a seminar on like trans history in CC. That would
Yeah,
be super
that'd be
cool. I
amazing.
don't know, like if I could find, I don't know, are there trans historians? I don't have that in my department, but
Yeah, there are for sure. Offhand, I can't think of any like right offhand, but I could probably get you a list. I can think
yeah,
of a
that would
whole bunch
be
of people
super
who
cool.
would yeah, if I can't immediately recommend you people directly to contact, I can probably reach out to somebody, um, a couple of people who would know people. I know like right away offhand, there's a really famous trans author who wrote She's Not Here, and it's a really famous like
Hmm.
one of the first books that got
Yeah, I
really
know that one.
popular. Yeah, Jennifer Finney Boylan.
Hmm.
And Jennifer Finney Boylan has been like is super well connected in academia and could probably find all of those queer historians who have that stuff. So and as I understand, she's very willing to respond to emails and stuff. She actually I actually got to watch a fucking like my it was an online class at the time, but the school that I went to, she did a seminar there, which I got to see, which was so fucking cool. But that's just a little bit of a side story.
I could see
Yeah,
how
I
much you're
think
nerding out though, like on your face, like you like lit up.
yeah, it was super great. It was interestingly that course that I took, which was a sex and sexuality course that I took for a liberal arts fulfillment, it was amazing. And not only that, but it was like super affirming to find out that like, oh, wait a second, like there is a history of trans people. Like
Hmm.
I was locked away from that and I didn't know that, but we've been here and we've been fighting and we've been pushing and there's been all this shit that I can dig into. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I mean,
It's so
so
special. Like it is. I While we've talked, I guess, for like hours now, like about how
yeah,
fun debating is. Um,
yeah.
but like I still think that the best medium in general for communicating is storytelling. Like
Yeah, I
there's
agree.
just yeah, just hearing people's stories. I don't know, a lot of people always like they always say like, oh, like everyone knows about the Holocaust, right, when it comes to
Mhm.
genocide education, but it wasn't always the case. It's something
Yep.
that really started to be in people's minds around the 70s with like the beginnings of Holocaust like movies and cinema and stuff and books, as survivors started to feel more comfortable talking about what they experienced. And like, and now it's something that people are very educated about. I mean, not as much as I'd like, but
Yeah, of
still more
course.
so than other genocides. And I think that, yeah,
Mm.
I wish we would get better at telling people stories. Everyone's so focused on diversity visually of actors, and that's super important. But I want to see diversity in stories. Like
Yeah.
that's to me, like that is just so important.
Yeah, and I do think that there's something like I love history, and I stress people to learn history to the best of their ability, and one of the things that I talk about on my channel a lot is history, and
That's super cool.
I have a series that has one episode in it right now called History Mama, which was heavily inspired by Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. If you've ever heard of that,
Yeah.
it's an amazing podcast. That's like it's history storytelling. Like
Hmm.
he always says, I'm not a professional historian, but I do a lot of reading, and I'm trying to tell the cool stories so that people get excited and go read about it more about themselves.
Yeah.
And I want to do more of that. Unfortunately, with history, it takes a lot of research. So I'm
Yeah.
behind, but I have a couple of History Mama episodes that I've been slowly chipping away at, and then I'm gonna fucking drop them. I'm gonna have a whole playlist of these History Mama. The first one I did was the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was surprisingly one of my most successful videos. Like people love the shit, and so like I do want to get better at history at telling history in a way that's really exciting to people. Because I think people get the idea that history is like super boring and like lists of this many
Dates
people
and
went to
wars
this
and yeah.
place with dates and words, but there's so much humanity to be gained from understanding history. And when you don't know about history, it's like you're disoriented. You can't see
Hmm.
things that other people can see. Like there are things like, I mean, for example, one just very obvious example that I can bring off the top of my head. uh, Donald Trump at CPAC just what, a month or two ago, uh, repeated the line "America first, America first, America first" over and over and over again. Literally, had America first in capital letters. This is capital A, America first. America first was the slogan used by American Nazis, and nobody
Yeah.
knows that because it's not taught about. And it's just like, this is the thing. You know a piece of history, you recognize that. You don't know history, you don't recognize them doing the thing that they already did once before. And it's
Hmm.
just like, it's so important. It's so important to not be uh to not be dissociated from the history of the world and the history of other humans in that way.
Yeah,
So,
I hate how we teach Holocaust history, particularly history about Nazis, and it focuses so much on vilifying Nazis, right, themselves rather than their ideas, as if
yeah.
they were like these pure like evil devil people. Um,
Yeah.
so like, and we do it as a way to separate it from ourselves, right? As a way to say, like, oh, we could never fall into those traps. That's just
Yeah.
like this one off situation where they could be doing this. And that's why you're in a situation where, like, there are situations where I want to make comparisons to Hitler, and
Yeah.
everyone's just immediately like, oh, like, oh, I don't know if it's that far. And I'm like, but I don't know. I feel like there's a legitimate comparison. But yeah, like when you treat them like they're these, like, non humans, you don't realize that like we can fall into those exact same patterns, and I feel like we
Yeah.
kind of are. I feel like we kind of have seen a lot of those patterns, especially in the last 10 years. um
Yeah.
and but if I ever talk about that, like, people are just think I'm completely insane.
You want to know what was a fucking wild trip for me that's like similar on this? People have found this before. It's somewhere on my Discord. Back in 2016, on the night of the election, Hillary versus Trump. I called into, are you familiar with David Pakman?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I called into David Pakman's show. And somebody found the clip and was like, "I found you." I'm like, "Yeah, I told you." But I called in that night and I got in to talk about trans issues in America and how I was personally very upset by the what I believed that Donald Trump would be really horrible for trans issues. And I said, I think, and I told David Pakman, I was like, I feel like a lot of people don't talk about this, but this isn't good. Like he's made these motions of like, oh, I like LGBT people, and yet everything that he proposes, all of his positions would be horrible for us. And
Mhm.
sure of fucking enough, now looking back all the way back to 2016 and hearing myself in my own voice talking about these things that then became pivotal fucking issues over the last 4 years was very uh what's the word, it was very validating is the word
Mhm.
I'm looking for, because there's a lot of people who will tell you that you're being hysterical, that you're being that you look that you're being dramatic, saying that there's that Donald Trump is leaning on fascist rhetoric, that there's Nazi elements in his party. And but if you have the facts to back it up, then you can take some confidence in it. And I don't think that people were really wrong. I don't think anybody was really wrong. Like, to call him a strongman fascist who powered into office largely by exploiting people's disgust and hate towards other people. Like, I mean, there's no like his language towards immigrants, his language towards, and of course he kept the LGBT stuff on a real down low early on, but we know he ended up banning all trans people from the military. He ended up
Mhm.
issuing a memo via the Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services, that told people how to spot trans people. And and it is so bad. It's just horrible. It's like, look for an Adam's apple and facial hair, and it's like, okay, first of all, you're going to get a lot of false positives there, which is like, that's a practical problem. You're going to get a lot of people, like, women, like cis women have problems with fucking facial hair too,
Mhm.
like, it's not just, but also the fact that like this was a government issued memo on how to spot trans people so you can kick them, so you can discriminate against them, is like a level like that is so fucked. And people didn't even know about it. People don't even know about it. It's just, oh god, it's so bad. And yeah, I
Well,
I,
we
I
need to be
wish,
able to make those comparisons, right?
yeah,
And it doesn't, and just because you compare something doesn't mean you're equating it,
yeah,
or saying that it's at the same dangerous kind of level.
yeah,
We need to focus much more, and this is why I wish, I'll repeat again, I just wish that we taught World War II and Nazi history differently, and we focused much more on vilifying the ideas, and the dangerous ideas associated with it rather than the people behind it. Not to say that those people didn't do horrible things, they did, but
right,
the truth is that anyone and everyone in the right circumstances can be susceptible to those ideas, if you're not aware of how they come up.
yeah.
And yeah,
How did
I
you
know.
feel, by the way, just out of curiosity, how did you feel about the movie Jojo Rabbit?
I didn't see
You've
it.
seen it? Oh my god, okay, you should see it. Personally, I thought it was really good at doing exactly what you're talking about.
What was it
And
about?
so Jojo Rabbit is about a kid who is in the Hitler Youth, and he uh he finds out that there is a Jewish stowaway in his house.
Mm-hmm.
And this kid is so into the ideology that his imaginary friend is literally Hitler. And so it's a very funny, it's a very darkly funny movie. But and it was made it was made by a Taika Waititi, who I love. And he also plays Hitler in the movie. So he the imaginary friend Hitler is it's like hilariously goofy because it's like a child's imagination of what like he thinks like Hitler would be based on what he's been taught in these things. But I thought it really succeeded on two levels. It did a very good job of talking about the ideas versus like saying like, oh, all Nazis were like these they were like orcs that are just automatically
Mm-hmm.
evil from birth. but it also did a really good job at portraying indoctrination, which I talked about earlier on in the stream that I think is really super important to bring up. And it does that really well because this kid is like super gung ho. He's like super gung ho. And in fact, like he's more gung ho than like his teachers. And it's like there's this whole aspect of like this kid uh being really into like this ideology that's been foisted on him by the circumstances, and then only to like I don't want to spoil anything because a lot of stuff happens in the movie, but he has this there's this whole like slow and sure inversion of like what he views and how he totally changes and sees the world differently as a result of getting out and away from the indoctrination that he was being put into. And it also points out that like this kid is obviously a good like a good person at heart, but all he's ever known is the messaging of the Nazi party because that's all that was given to him. So that's
Mhm.
all he has to operate on.
We're
And it's
products
like,
of our environment.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I do agree that like obviously like there like the scary thing I think that a lot of people, and part of the reason maybe why it doesn't get taught this way is, it's easier to have like a black and white good guy bad guy type situation. But the thing that's scary is that then Germany was a massive country, and it took a lot of people to enact World War II and the Holocaust. A lot of
Hmm.
people, and all of those people were not born evil. All of those people were not born like anti-Semitic. All of those people were the subjects of a society that set up these pathways, and to varying degrees, often many times very coercive, but these structures guide the way that people's lives go. And for some people may get out of it, some people through chance circumstance or moral a moral awakening or whatever, they might find out. But a lot of people are just going to find themselves pushed along with the rest of their society. And that's scary because it makes us think that, oh, like, are there these things in our society that could be doing that right now? And I would
Hmm.
say yes. There are structures in our society that push people down bad paths. I mean, there's so many. Everything from, you know, uh, the structural racism that has been around, forever in this country since this country was founded, but to even to the way that like things are talked about in media, to the types of stories that get pushed. And thankfully we're not at the point where we don't have an autocrat, we don't have a single Führer who can dictate down, but there are people who want to push for that. And learning learning history, learning that people being that indoctrination is terrifying, can do so much damage, can perhaps make sure that we never get to that point. And that's what I hope for in most of
Yeah.
my
This
stuff that I work.
sorry.
Yeah, no, go
Um
ahead.
mo- uh yeah, this just reminds me, like, if you look at Nazis in that new lens, you start
Mhm.
realizing how much of these patterns are everywhere around you, even patterns that you've fallen into yourself, right? Which is
Yeah.
probably the most important. The I know, like, and I'm not creating a false equivalency between left and right, but even like there are situations of things where I do see, like on the left, where I do see them fall into those same
Mhm.
patterns,
Yeah.
and where I've seen myself fall into those same patterns, especially with vilification. The with On YouTube, and the way we prop up these people as, like, everyone has like their favorite content creator and they worship them, like that attitude. I call it like great man syndrome, but it obviously can
Yeah.
apply to women, and anyone
Yeah.
in between. But like that kind of stuff, it starts making you just way more aware, of yourself, of falling into those same traps. The biggest one, I would say, is like those greater good arguments, because ultimately, and a lot of people don't know this, that Himmler, the person who orchestrated the final solution of the Holocaust, he knew what he was doing was wrong. It's part of what makes what he did so terrible. You can go and look at his speech of when he gave it to his fellow officers, where he said, it breaks my heart what we have to do, but we have to do it for the greater good of the Germans." And like, and and that idea of breaking morality for this so-called greater good kind of idea is something that you can see a lot of people using in their everyday
Yep.
life. And so
It's
yeah, it
dangerous.
makes me very aware of it.
Yeah, it's the sort of Machiavellianism, and
Hmm.
I think it is a very difficult thing to think about because um like there's always a question of like how far is too far, and where is that line, and that's a
Yep.
fucking crazy hard question. You know what I mean? When especially when you're talking about politics, when you're talking about like, I mean, of course, like we all know like the on the left of the stereotype between the like super revolutionary types and the non-revolutionary types, and that is, but I see that there's legitimacy in that conversation because it's like, well, it is really fucked how our society right now uh totally seems to be totally fine with the fact that we're running concentration camps of a type on the border. And yeah, they might not be like they might not be death camps, but they're really fucking bad. And we kind of, some of us are mad about it, but a lot of us are just kind of like, it's part of there's a lot of Americans who are just kind of like, oh, it's part of our, we have to do it to make sure the border doesn't explode or something. And it's kind of
Hmm.
like, okay, so these things get really murky. And and then I think there is another problem, which is that I think that even on the left there is a lack of um structural analysis, for lack of a better term, of that like a lot of times the reason why like this Machiavellianism is able to get out of control is because so much power is given to so few. That like when you have a situation where,
Very true.
you know, yeah, like you have a situation where like Hitler has supreme power, and then he divvies that power on very like stingily to a number of people. Those people suddenly have so much power that their conclusion, even if it's totally wrong, even if it's totally ridiculous, like we must do this for the good of Germany. Well, he was wrong, like really wrong, obviously. And it's like, but he was given this power to make that mistake, and nobody could tell him no. And when you have power that isn't distributed, there's no checks. There's that is it's so problematic. And I really wish that like one thing I really hope that I talk about this a lot on my show, but something that I hope to teach, to impress on people and show people is that like you have to be very careful with how you deal with power, because power can go to your head really quick. But not just that, it can like even the best leader you can possibly imagine is never going to be perfect. And
Hmm.
their flaws are going to be magnified by however much power they wield. Imagine if like the
That is so
greatest
true.
leader, yeah, like, right? Like, the greatest, like, humans are kind of like a conduit. You put a ton of power through a human, it's gonna come out in maybe some really good ways through their strengths, but their weaknesses are also gonna be magnified. And so, yes, do I believe that individuals can do a really good job at like strengthening their strengths and improving their weaknesses so they don't have as many character flaws or whatever? I do believe that, obviously. Of course, humans can do that. But we also have to recognize that even small character flaws, when given incredible power, can do a lot of damage. So it's really, in my mind, very, very important that we learn, that we recognize that
Have
like,
checks and balances.
yeah, checks and balances, and like outside of the American meme, because I think our checks and balances are not that great, but like people think of the Constitution or whatever, and I think there's a lot of flaws with that. But truly, real checks and balances are super, super, super important. And it becomes increasingly important the more impactful a position is. Like um,
Well, it's
it,
one of the
it's
reasons why debating is so good, right? Because we're almost
yeah,
always putting each other in checks and balances, just like with our own opinions, even if we don't have that much power, but especially for those who have audiences, right?
yeah,
And large platforms, there is power that comes with that. So,
yep,
yeah,
there
I do
is,
think
yeah.
that's cool. The
And we have a lot of like issues online about, I think there's really fucked up incentive structures on in streaming, that nobody can really do anything about right now, or not
mhm.
much about, because we're all contractors that are subsidiaries
Everyone's
of
trying to
one
earn a
of two
living.
companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these things exist, but I still think that we can do better than just letting it be. You know what I mean? We can do better than replicating the problems of the past. I think we can do better at providing checks and not creating super cults of personality and networking and making sure there's multiple voices. Yeah. So yeah.
That's why I'm so happy that you and I have gotten to talk today, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
it's
I
been
feel like I got to know
wonderful.
you so
Yeah,
much
great.
more. And
Yeah.
and now I'm even more excited to debate you because I don't know. Because now I know
Yeah.
so much more about where you get your ideas from, and I feel like that'll also allow me to be more charitable, um,
Yeah. Yeah,
as a consequence.
absolutely. Well, and also maybe you'll kick my ass and find out one of my
I
weak
don't know
spots
about
and
that, but
that'll learn
I'll
from it.
certainly try.
Yeah, well, hey, listen, I always like it's always a nice feeling to get surprisingly owned.
I
Doesn't
know,
doesn't happen
especially
very
when you're.
much, but
It's a good feeling, to be honest.
yeah, it is. It is. It's a good feeling to go, "Oh shit, I hadn't even identified that weak spot. Good thing it happened in this sparring session with somebody who's not going to kill me. Now I can learn to shore up that defense so I don't get owned when I
You
go
know,
up against a Nazi or something, Yeah,
one last question. I noticed that there
absolutely.
is a guitar in your background, and
Yeah.
I'm a huge guitar nerd. So, do you play guitar? I'm guessing you do.
I am learning to play guitar. Yeah. I played a little bit of guitar. Okay, so when I was younger, I played a lot of piano, and then I started to learn guitar, and then a bunch of life stuff happened, and I haven't touched a guitar in forever. But I got the urge really bad lately because I don't have my piano anymore for another random life reason, which sucks. But I really wanted to play music, and so I got this. I spent a bunch of time thinking about it, and I eventually settled on this Ibanez 12 string, and I've been loving
Amazing.
it. I'm super bad right now, but
You are
uh
ambitious for a 12 string, though. I could never try
well,
that.
I the thing is I love to I thought about it a lot, but I was like, I love this I love the sound. I love the sound so much. So, I figure, go with the 12 string, learn it, get it all, uh, get used to holding down the strings, and then if I wanna get a 6 string at some point, hey, I'll be going down from the
Yeah,
12 to the
no, it's
6, and
way.
then it'll be a little
Yeah, it's the
easier.
same thing like when you learn on an acoustic versus going to electric because it's so much easier. I'm gonna get so much hate for this. This might get me canceled, but it is so much easier to play the electric than playing the classical. So that's why you're always supposed to
No,
learn
it
on
is.
an
It
acoustic, right?
absolutely is. Yep. No, I was told the same thing when I because I did take guitar lessons for a while when I was a lot younger, and my guitar teacher was like, we're gonna get you started on an acoustic, and then you could switch to the electric later because it's much more it's physically easier. Like
Hmm.
the basic skill set, like learning the chords, all that, just as hard. Mentally, very challenging, but physically, you don't have to be as clean with your chords. You don't have to be as consistent with like how you're holding down the strings. And the fact that you can do like all kinds of tricky stuff that with the electric because the pickup is so high that
Hmm.
like you can just barely touch a string and it'll get you a note that sounds fine. But on an acoustic, if you're going to be playing without an amp, you're not gonna you're gonna get a really muted sound if you don't know what you're doing with the string. So yeah, that was my experience, and yeah, I recognize it's going to be a little harder, but at the same time, I'm very excited, and I have been. For the record, chat, I have been practicing, and Jessica Metal, I have been practicing the video that you sent me. Don't you worry, I have been. Don't you worry.
You know,
So yeah.
at some point, because I've noticed that a lot of like Twitch, YouTube debaters are musicians,
Hmm.
and I don't know like what's the reason for that like weird combination.
Yeah,
But maybe we should all just start a big band.
that would be
Yeah.
fucking awesome. I have jam sessions that I want to do so bad with people in the future. Once I get there, like if it was with piano, like I'm already like I can already improvise and play. I'm very confident in piano, but I've got a long way to go in guitar. But on this at the
You
same
see,
time, I'm
I'm the
very
opposite.
excited about it.
Learning
Yeah,
piano, but pretty good at guitar.
piano is challenging, but it's super rewarding. The thing that annoys me about piano is that like it's such an inaccessible instrument.
It
Like
is. It's
again,
so, yep. It takes up so
I
much
know how
space,
to play.
and
Yeah,
they're
takes up
expensive.
space and expensive. Oh my god. Now, that said, the experience of playing on a Steinway grand or other masterwork piano instrument
Mhm.
is like nothing else. It is a divine experience. And I wish that every person who ever gets learns to play keyboard or piano gets the experience of getting to play on an instrument like a Steinway, because it is a masterwork. Every single one of them is a masterpiece. It is this unbelievably complex machine that has a richness of sound that can hardly even be imagined unless you've sat in front of one and played it. Um,
Oh, my
but
chat just thought of the name for the band, called the Debate Bros.
The Debate Bros. Yeah, it's perfect. I love it. I love it. And we'll have the leading song will be "Debate Me, Debate Me,
Yeah,
Debate Me."
it'll be perfect. Um,
Incredible.
I think it's
Yeah.
fantastic. But yeah, honestly, thank you so much for this chat. It was super cool.
Thank
Like, I'm
you.
just getting into streaming, so it was really nice
Well,
for
you're a fantastic interviewer.
oh
Like
my God, thank
fantastic.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That means a lot. That means a lot.
Yeah.
I was actually
I mean,
super nervous, right? I was super because you're
yeah.
very good with rhetoric. So it's like, oh, I was a
What do you
little,
think I was gonna spin you around in circles? No.
I don't know, like, yeah, you never know with like if you're gonna jive with someone with these interviews or
Yeah.
not. And yeah, I feel like we did, and that was super, super cool. So thank you
Yeah,
so
well,
much, like, for
I
coming.
really love this, and I am super happy to talk with you. Anytime you want to talk, just let me know, and I'm totally down to work on stuff with you. Yeah, so thank you so much. And by the way, chat, uh, go follow Aristocracy TV on Twitch,
Oh,
please,
thank you.
because if you like this type of stuff, Eris is streaming this type of stuff, so there you go. Yeah, so thank you so much, and let's talk soon. Let's keep in
Yeah,
touch,
we're
okay?
friends on Discord now, so
Yeah, and I'm
so
in
you
your
could DM
Discord
me
now,
there.
which I didn't know about. I knew about Calliopean Club, which I
Oh,
think I
yeah, this
didn't know
one
about.
we're not sure if we're keeping this one. We might be combining it with CC,
Okay.
um, but yeah, so I'll
Well,
I'll let you
yeah.
know either way.
Well,
And we
thank you
should
so
bring you
much,
to
and
CC for the seminar idea. I think that would be really cool
yeah,
to
that would be
talk about
super
trans
cool.
history.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eris.
No problem. See ya.
Bye for now.